The night sky pulsed with colors so vibrant they seemed to hum, a living, breathing kaleidoscope of greens, blues, and purples. The northern lights were more than a spectacle. They were a dream I'd chased for years. I had devoured books about them, admired their captured beauty in photographs, but seeing them in person was incomparable. Their dance across the heavens felt like an invitation, a secret show for anyone willing to brave the Arctic wilderness. But tonight, something was wrong. I had driven hours to get here, leaving behind the last traces of humanity long before the sun dipped below the horizon. The frozen road stretched into nothingness, flanked by trees whose branches curled inward like skeletal hands. The isolation, at first, was comforting. I thought I wanted to be alone, needed to be alone. That was before the lights appeared, alive in a way I hadn't expected. They didn't just shimmer, they beckoned. Each flicker, each shift, seemed to align with something deeper inside me, something that whispered, "Come closer." People say you can run from your problems, but they don't tell you the weight of what chases you. I'd come here to escape, though from what exactly I wasn't sure. A failed marriage, a career that had withered like autumn leaves. Or maybe it was simpler than that, just the hollow ache of a life I couldn't recognize as my own. I'd grown up hearing my grandmother's stories of the lights. She called them the wanderers, spirits who drifted too far from home and lost their way. I used to laugh at her tales, dismissing them as folklore. But now, standing beneath their hypnotic glow, I wondered if there was truth in her warnings. The first whisper came as I was unpacking my camera. A faint voice, too soft to distinguish but unmistakable in the stillness of the night. I froze, every nerve on edge, but when I looked around, there was nothing, no movement, no sign of life. Just the wind, sharp and biting, and the lights, swirling above like they were watching. The forest felt alive. Shadows stretched unnaturally, pooling at the bases of the trees like ink. The snow underfoot crunched louder than it should have, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The lights, though beautiful, had begun to pulse erratically, as if in time with my heartbeat. I told myself it was the cold playing tricks on me, or maybe exhaustion. But as I followed the path deeper into the woods, the whispers grew louder. They didn't come from one direction, they came from everywhere, bouncing off the trees, carried on the wind. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. Their meaning was clear. Don't turn back. Time became slippery, a fog that muddled my thoughts. I didn't know how far I'd walked or how long I'd been out here. My phone had died hours ago, and the map in my hand felt useless, the markings meaningless against the ever-changing landscape. The lights no longer danced. They loomed, stretching lower, closer. They weren't just in the sky anymore. They were in my mind, threading through my thoughts, pulling memories from places I'd buried. My grandmother's voice came back to me, her stories now warnings I wished I'd heeded. Don't follow the lights, Rachel. They'll take what's yours. The trees around me had changed. Their trunks bent at impossible angles, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. They no longer resembled trees at all but silhouettes of something watching. I quickened my pace, but the ground beneath me felt unstable, cracking with each step. The whispers were no longer whispers, they were voices, sharp and clear. Closer. We've been waiting. You're almost home. The lights pulsed brighter, enveloping the forest in an otherworldly glow. For a moment, I thought I saw faces in the auroras, distorted, hollow-eyed figures etched in the shifting colors. I tried to run, but the snow clung to my legs, dragging me down with every step. The air grew thicker, colder, until my breaths felt like shards of ice in my lungs. The voices pressed against my skull, a cacophony that drowned out all rational thought. And then I saw it. At the center of the lights, where the colors swirled most violently, was a shape. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely inhuman either. A shadow, darker than anything I'd ever seen, its edges flickering like static. It didn't move toward me, it didn't have to. The pull I'd felt all night had been it, drawing me closer, feeding on my curiosity, my isolation. I fell. The ice beneath me splintered like glass, sending me plunging into the abyss below. The last thing I saw was the lights, their colors growing brighter, consuming everything. When I woke, the world was wrong. The forest was gone, replaced by a flat expanse of ice that stretched endlessly. The sky above was empty, save for the northern lights, now pulsing with a sinister rhythm. I stumbled to my feet, but the reflection in the ice stopped me cold. It wasn't my face staring back at me. It was the shadow. Its glowing eyes met mine, and for the first time I understood. The lights didn't just feed on the lost. They made you one of them. The first snowfall of the year arrived with an eerie quiet, not the crisp chill I was used to. There was something wrong about it, something more than just the weight of winter settling in. The flakes fell from the sky in a strange, almost unnatural pattern. When the first flake touched my skin, I felt it before I saw it. A sharp sting, like 1,000 needles pricking my flesh. I flinched, expecting it to melt away, but it didn't. The mark it left behind burned, searing into my skin like a brand. I stared at the twisted symbol it formed on my hand, a shape I couldn't recognize, one that seemed to pulse with a hidden warning. That was just the beginning. My name is Kyle, and I'm just another guy trying to make a life for himself. I run my father's bookstore now, a small, dusty place that's barely keeping afloat. Business has been slow for years, and it's hard not to feel like my life is stuck in neutral. I never expected my days to be anything more than routine, but then the snow came and everything changed. I didn't believe in signs or symbols or anything strange, but when that first flake burned me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was trying to tell me something. A warning, a curse, who knows? I didn't believe in magic, but I was starting to wonder if I had somehow been marked by something far worse than a freak winter storm. I couldn't stop staring at the symbol, the way it seemed to throb beneath my skin, as if it were alive. And no matter how many times I washed my hands, no matter how hard I scrubbed, it stayed. It wasn't just a scar, it was part of me now. And the town wasn't immune. People started whispering, acting nervous. Everyone had seen the marks, whether on their arms, necks, or faces. No one spoke openly, but we all knew. Those who had been marked were different, changed somehow. Paranoia spread like wildfire. The more I looked into it, the more I realized I wasn't the only one being chosen by the snow. The snow kept falling. Relentlessly. The streets outside my window were blurred with the swirling flakes, the town buried beneath layers of white. There was a sense of stillness in the air, a heavy, suffocating silence. No one was out on the streets, not that I expected them to be. Everyone had retreated to their homes, to their safe places. Or at least I hoped they had. But there was something off. The air had a strange scent to it, like something metallic burning, like iron on fire. It lingered even indoors, despite the heater running full blast. It was suffocating. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I looked out the window, every time I walked down the hall, I could feel eyes on me, eyes that weren't human. At night, I started hearing things, whispers, soft at first, like voices carried on the wind. They were quiet, so quiet that I thought I was imagining it, but the more I listened, the clearer they became. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. Something was happening in this town, and it wasn't just the snow. I tried to avoid going outside. I didn't want to see any more of those marks. I didn't want to feel the weight of their presence on my skin. But as the days passed, I realized there was no escaping it. One night, while I was sitting at the counter of the bookstore, a sudden chill crept across the room. I turned to the window and froze. A symbol, etched in frost on the glass. I could almost make out the edges of it, glowing faintly in the moonlight. And as I stared at it, I thought I saw something, someone, moving behind the glass. When I blinked, it was gone. I couldn't shake the thought. This wasn't just the snow, someone was trying to communicate with us. Then the rumors began, stories of people growing sick. The markings on their skin weren't fading. They were growing, turning into raw, burning wounds. And it wasn't just their bodies that changed. Their minds, too. They started acting differently, more paranoid, more withdrawn. And the deeper they descended into madness, the more symbols they gathered. What was this? And why was I being marked? It wasn't just the pain of the symbol, it was the way it made me feel. As if I wasn't in control anymore. As if my skin, my body, wasn't even mine. I started seeing things. At first, it was small things, shadows in the corner of my vision, flickers of movement in the hallway. But the longer I stayed in the bookstore, the more the symbols seemed to grow. Not when I was looking at them, but when I wasn't. I couldn't stop it. The fever came next, making me shiver uncontrollably. My body felt like it was on fire, like the snow had crawled beneath my skin, spreading its heat deeper with each passing hour. Had I been chosen? Was this my fault? Or was this something that had always been waiting for me? I couldn't tell anymore. One night, the snow never stopped. I woke up, drenched in sweat, my skin searing with pain. I couldn't breathe. The marks had multiplied. They covered my arms, my neck, my face. They were everywhere, pulsing like they had a life of their own. The pain was unbearable. It felt like my skin was on fire, but the fire was cold, like it was searing me from the inside. And then I heard it, the voices. Familiar voices calling out to me, calling me from somewhere beyond. I didn't understand what they were saying. The words were garbled, unintelligible, but the sense of urgency was clear. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't listen. The wind howled outside, louder now, and the temperature dropped even further. I knew then that the snow was never the real danger. It wasn't the cold that would consume me. It was the marks, the symbols, the darkness that had been slowly eating away at me since the first flake had fallen. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling, desperate for any kind of help. The screen flickered, the image distorting. One last image flashed before my eyes, a symbol, my face superimposed over it, and then everything went black. The snow had come for me, and there was no escape. I've heard it before, the mountain calling, but I didn't realize it was calling my name. It happened on my third solo hike up the ridge, a place I'd trekked 100 times before, a familiar route. But today, there was something wrong, something I couldn't quite place. The usual crisp crunch of the snow beneath my boots, gone. Instead, a strange stillness hung in the air, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to the altitude, but then came the whisper. At first, it was faint, like a breeze teasing the edge of my hearing. But then, I realized it wasn't the wind. It wasn't the snow. It was calling names, and one of those names was mine. I'm Erica, a seasoned hiker. I've made my peace with the mountain. It's been my refuge, my escape. Out here, it's just me and the wild, where the outside world fades into the distant hum of nothingness. But I didn't come here to feel peace this time. I came because I needed to run away from my life. My brother, Alex, died in a hiking accident last year. He was with me. I blame myself for it. Every day, and now, the whispers. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. Grief does that to you. But then, the mountain whispered his name. And mine, I'm not sure if it's my grief, my mind breaking down, or something darker, but this mountain is pulling me deeper into its madness. The silence of the mountain has always been its beauty, but now, the air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. Snow hung on the trees in a way that made the forest look suffocating, its branches bending under the weight, almost as though the trees themselves were struggling to breathe. I took a deep breath. The cold was biting, but it didn't sting. It felt wrong. I wasn't alone here. I could feel it. And then the whispers started. First, a soft rustling. I dismissed it. Snow shifting in the wind, I thought. But no, the whispers weren't the wind. They were words. Names that weren't mine, but felt familiar, like they belonged to me. Erica! Alex! The voice was distant at first, fading in and out like the wind's teasing hum. But the more I listened, the more real it became, echoing across the icy expanse of the mountain. My heart pounded in my chest. I was alone. Or was I? I kept walking, my boots crunching against the snow, trying to outrun the whispers that seemed to follow me with each step. But then it wasn't just names. It was warnings. You don't belong here. Leave now, or you'll be the next one. I felt my pace quicken, my breath coming faster as I tried to push through the anxiety clawing at my chest. But the whispers wouldn't stop. They surrounded me, rising, louder now. The snow felt like it was getting deeper, like I was trudging through wet cement. It was harder to move, like the mountain was trying to pull me down into the frozen ground. Suddenly, there was a sound, a deafening crack, a fracture in the mountain. The avalanche had started. The snow trembled beneath my feet, and I knew, with sickening certainty, that it wasn't just nature at work. The mountain wasn't simply reacting to the weather. It was alive. It wanted me. I scrambled forward, every muscle in my body screaming, but the whispers were relentless, growing louder. Erica, run! The voice of my brother, clear as if he were standing right beside me. I whipped around, heart racing, my chest tight with panic, expecting to see him, to feel his presence. But there was nothing, only snow and trees. The emptiness of the mountain. I was alone. But the mountain wasn't alone. I was panicking now, my heart hammered in my chest. The mountain was alive, alive with hunger. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were a cacophony, layered over each other, each voice desperate and pleading. Run, hide, it's too late. The mountain, it was coming alive. The ground trembled beneath me, the trees groaned with the weight of the coming storm, and the snow, it was moving. No longer just an avalanche, no, it was something more. The mountain's rage had reached its peak. It wanted me. It needed me, and I didn't have much time. I could feel the pressure building, like the air itself was thick with the weight of a storm just about to burst. Every step I took was heavier. The snow was deep now, the crunch of my boots muted by the weight pressing down from above. I stumbled over rocks and roots, but still, the mountains seemed to guide me, drawing me toward the edge. I reached the slope just as the first rumble of the avalanche broke free. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't obey. The whispers, they screamed now, demanding my surrender. I saw it then, the wave of snow, slow at first but picking up speed. The roar of it, like 1,000 voices screaming in fury, came from above. I had seconds. Seconds before the mountains swallowed me whole. The snow moved faster than I could run. I stumbled, my body heavy with fear, each footstep swallowed by the endless white. And then, darkness. When I woke up, I was buried under a blanket of snow. The weight of it was suffocating. But when I finally clawed my way free, the mountain was still. Silent once more, I made it out. Or, did I? The whispers stopped, but not before one final name echoed through the stillness. Mine. I don't know what happened out there. I don't know if I survived the avalanche, or if the mountain just decided to let me go for now. But I know one thing. The mountain is still calling, and it's waiting. It's winter in the mountains, a world so still it feels as though time itself has frozen. The wind doesn't just whistle, it howls, a wild creature begging to be heard. The snow blankets everything in a quiet that's almost too much. There's something off about it, though, something that unsettles the air, makes it feel heavier than it should. My name's Julia. I thought moving here with my fiancé, Ethan, would be a fresh start. We needed a break from the chaos of the city after everything that happened with his sister. A quiet cabin in the wilderness seemed perfect, peaceful, isolated. But what we've found here is far from what we expected. The first drop came on a late afternoon. I was in the kitchen, and I glanced out the window at the roof above, where icicles hung like jagged teeth. Then it happened. A single drop of something red fell from the tip of one. At first, I thought it was just the light playing tricks on me, or maybe something from a passing car, but then it happened again. This isn't just a cabin in the woods, it's a place with a history. The blood that falls from the icicles is no accident. The mountain holds a dark secret, one tied to a sinister, ancient force. This isn't about weather patterns or simple decay. It's a manifestation of something far older, something hungry. And we, drawn here by our own need for solitude, are its next victims. I've always been the type to stay grounded. I believe in the supernatural, but I don't go searching for it. After Ethan's sister died, we needed to shut everything out. The city felt suffocating, full of reminders of the past we couldn't escape. So we came here seeking peace. But instead of healing, we've stumbled onto something that might destroy us both. I'm not crazy, I know what I saw. But with each drop of blood staining the snow, I feel this growing dread. It's not just the blood, it's everything. The silence is too thick, the air too still. Something is waiting. Ethan doesn't believe me. He thinks it's just a trick of the light, something natural. It's just the thaw, he says, standing by the fire, his back turned as he warms his hands. But I can't shake the feeling that this place isn't empty. It's watching us. The cabin creaks at night. The wind doesn't simply blow, it screams through the trees, clawing at the roof. The walls groan as if they're breathing, like the house itself is alive, shifting with the gusts. And every night I hear something in the attic, something moving, something that doesn't belong. But it's the icicles that get to me. They hang like sharp daggers from the roof, their tips always dripping, always. The blood has started to pool on the snow beneath them, thick and dark. It smells of iron, and each drop seems to settle in my chest like a weight I can't shake. That night I couldn't sleep. The dripping was louder than usual. It became rhythmic, like a countdown, and I could feel the air growing colder with each drop. The sound was unbearable, echoing in the silence of the cabin. I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I had to see for myself. I stepped outside, the cold air biting into my skin. The moment my boots hit the snow, the stench of decay hit me. The blood had pooled deeper than before, like it had been dripping for hours, even though the storm had just started. I called Ethan outside, but he didn't understand. "It's just melting snow," he said. "It's nothing." Then he stepped outside, saw the blood with his own eyes, and his face went pale. This isn't normal," he whispered. His voice cracked, a hint of fear creeping in, and that's when I realized. It wasn't the storm that was dangerous. The storm was just a veil hiding something far worse. The days passed, but the blood didn't stop. It grew darker, thicker. It was no longer just dripping. It seemed to pulse, almost like it was alive. The more I stared at it, the more I saw strange shapes moving beneath the surface, shadows that didn't belong. And the whispers started. I'd hear them in the wind, barely audible at first, just my name carried on the breeze like a breath. The snow was silent, too silent, but the whispers weren't. Ethan and I tried to leave. We packed our things, but every time we tried to step out of the cabin, the storm pushed us back. It was like the mountain itself didn't want us to go. And then, one night, I saw it, the shape in the snow. It wasn't a shadow. It was a figure, a person. I approached it, my heart pounding, but as I got closer, it melted away into the ground. Vanished. Ethan was no longer the calm, rational man I'd known. His eyes were wide with fear now, his voice trembling when he spoke. The cabin felt wrong, distorted. The walls creaked in new ways like they were shifting, and the reflections in the windows, those weren't ours. They showed something different, something darker. The blood, the whispers, the figure in the snow, it was all connected. The icicles, the shadows, they weren't just a result of some strange weather phenomenon. They were a warning. An old evil was awakening. Ethan still refused to believe it. He told me the blood was just a trick of the light, that we were both exhausted. But when he started hearing the whispers, when he saw the figures in the snow, I could see it in his eyes. He was scared, too. We were both losing our grip on reality. The mountain wasn't just a mountain anymore. The icicles, the blood, the figures, they were part of something far older, a darkness that had been buried for centuries. The blood wasn't just a warning, it was a ritual, a signal. The mountain had been waiting for us for the right time to resurface. The storm raged, the whispers grew louder. The icicles rattled against the roof like they were alive, like they were waiting to break free and claim what was theirs. The air grew heavier with each passing moment, pressing down on us. I wasn't just afraid for our lives anymore. I was terrified for our souls. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was a frozen wasteland. The icicles, those same icicles, no longer just dripped. They bloomed with blood. Thick, crimson liquid poured from them, staining the ground in elaborate, intricate patterns. I tried to scream, but the snow swallowed the sound. Ethan turned to me, his face ashen. His lips moved, but his eyes weren't looking at me. They were looking beyond me. "Julia, we're not alone," he whispered, his voice distant, hollow. I spun around, but he was already gone. The snow had consumed him, swallowed him whole, like he had never been there at all. Now I'm alone. The storm rages on. The blood still drips, but I don't know for how much longer. I don't know if Ethan was ever real or if he was part of the mountain's hunger. And now the whispers, they're calling me too. The icicles are growing. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I don't want to stay here. I've always been fascinated by caves. There's something about the isolation, the complete disconnection from the world above, that draws me in. Growing up, I'd always heard stories about the ice cave, a place carved from centuries of frozen earth, its depths rumored to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. But it wasn't just the stories that intrigued me, it was the stillness, the kind of quiet that settled deep into your bones. When my brother died 2 years ago, something inside me fractured. The grief settled in like a cold, unshakable weight. I was used to running away, escaping into nature, into the vastness of the world, as if it could drown out the noise in my head. The ice cave seemed like the perfect place to clear my thoughts, to confront the heaviness of what I couldn't escape. What I didn't know, though, was that this cave wasn't just a place of quiet. It was a place where shadows had lives of their own. The ice cave was famous around here, a labyrinth of frozen tunnels and glowing blue ice that lit up the dark like some kind of strange, unnatural beacon. They called it a natural wonder. Some even said it was cursed, an ancient burial ground of sorts. They didn't say it was a place where the line between light and dark could blur, where the shadows that lingered didn't obey the same rules as those in the world above. I'd been to caves before, but this one, it was different. The deeper I went, the more I realized that the cave didn't just hold my grief. It seemed to feed on it. My name is Alex. I've always had this need to push boundaries. Maybe it's because, for most of my life, I felt like I was living in someone else's shadow. My brother, James, he was the bright one, the one who always seemed to have a direction, a purpose. When he died, everything in my world went dark. It's been 2 years, but it feels like a lifetime. I thought the ice cave would give me some kind of closure, a way to process the loss. I told myself I wasn't running from my grief, but deep down I knew I was. It wasn't just the cave's beauty that called to me. It was the silence, the isolation. It felt like something I could control, a place where I could shut everything out. But from the moment I stepped into that cave, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the way the ice glowed like it was alive. It wasn't the eerie hum in the air, like the cave itself was breathing. It was the shadows. They moved in ways they shouldn't. The entrance was nothing more than a narrow crack in the rock, surrounded by jagged ice formations that glittered in the faint light. The air was biting cold, and the sound of water dripping echoed through the stone. I could feel the weight of the darkness around me, pressing in on all sides. As I stepped deeper into the cave, the glow from the ice intensified. The walls around me pulsed with an almost unnatural light, shifting as though alive, as if the very rock was breathing. I moved carefully, feeling the crunch of the ice underfoot, but the further I went, the colder it became. I could see my breath now, hanging in the air like mist, and the sound of my boots crunching against the ice seemed deafening in the otherwise still silence. That's when I saw it. A shadow. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, a trick of the light. But no, it was real. A dark shape stretching out of the ice, moving without a light source to cast it. It was alive. I froze. I stood there, frozen in place, my heart racing. The shadow, like a dark, creeping tendril, moved toward me, slow and deliberate. There was no rational explanation for it. Shadows don't move like that. I shook my head, telling myself it was the cold messing with my mind. But it didn't stop. I backed away, trying to steady my breath and turn to leave. But when I did, I froze again. Another shadow, behind me. I didn't need to look at it to know it was there. It was growing, its edges flickering like the last light of a dying fire stretching toward me. Panic surged through me, but no matter where I moved, it followed. I turned. The first shadow, closer. And then the second, nearer. They weren't just following me, they were mimicking me. Every step I took, they mirrored. But when I looked at them directly, they froze. When I looked away, closer, faster, I couldn't think, I couldn't breathe. I started running, not caring where I was going. My legs moved faster, but the shadows, they were faster. Every time I turned a corner in the icy maze, they were there, stretching into my peripheral vision. When I looked, they stopped. And when I didn't, they crept closer. I screamed. No sound. The shadows didn't just mimic me anymore, they were changing me. My movements, my actions, they were twisting into something unnatural. I couldn't stop. It was as if the shadows had become me, or I had become them. But the whispers started, faint at first like the wind through the ice. Stay with us. My heart pounded in my chest. The whispers grew louder and the shadows, once silent, began to move in rhythm with the words. It felt like they were calling to me, pulling at me from every corner. The worst part wasn't that the shadows were chasing me. It wasn't the way they crept and twisted. It wasn't even the whispers. It was the feeling that they weren't just following me, they were me. Every time I looked at them, I saw myself. But it wasn't my reflection. It was distorted, wrong. They moved like I did, but something was off. They mocked me. They became me, twisting and contorting, making my every movement feel foreign. The ice around me seemed to pulse with their presence. The shadows inched closer, no longer just trailing me, but pulling at my very soul. I could feel them tugging at the edges of my consciousness, like they were digging into the deepest parts of me. And then I saw something that stopped me cold. There, at the far end of the cavern, was a figure. My brother. I knew it was him. His face was pale, frozen like the ice around us, but it was him. But his shadow was the one that stretched out to me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "I'm sorry." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching. And the shadows, they were closing in on me, wrapping around my legs, my chest, pulling me toward him. I reached for him, but the shadows were suffocating me now, pulling me into the ice. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The cave was alive with them, alive with me. The air was thick with the presence of the shadows, and they were everywhere now, their whispers rising, filling the cave. I tried to scream again, but it was useless. No sound would escape. I looked down at my feet. My shadow was no longer mine. It was pulling me, stretching toward the edge of the cavern, toward the abyss. The shadows wrapped around me, squeezing tighter, pulling me down, deeper. I couldn't escape. The cave was still. The shadows faded, but I wasn't alone anymore. The shadows had taken me. The storm hit fast. One moment it was just a light dusting, harmless enough to ignore, the kind of snowfall that didn't warrant a second thought. But then, within hours, the winds picked up and the snow thickened. What started as a quiet, peaceful winter night became an impenetrable white blur. The whole town, nestled in the valley, seemed to vanish under the weight of it. The isolation wasn't new to me. I had chosen this place to escape the noise of the city, but this storm wasn't like any I'd seen before. It was the second night that things started to change. I glanced out the window, trying to make sense of the shifting shapes in the snow. I could barely make out the outline of my neighbor's house through the haze. But then I saw it, a massive mound of snow rising up in the distance. Its shape, a gaping, monstrous mouth. It wasn't just a drift, it was alive. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had left the city chasing a dream of a quieter, simpler life. What I found instead was a town that didn't quite welcome me. The locals were friendly enough, but there was always something off. They spoke of harsh winters, but this felt different. I should have known something was wrong the moment I arrived. The town had an air of tension about it, a feeling of unease that no one wanted to acknowledge. They'd warned me about the winters, how the snow could come down heavy, how dangerous it could be, but they never mentioned this. The snow here wasn't just a part of the landscape. It seemed to have a life of its own, creeping closer with each passing hour. And then there was the maw. The cold was suffocating. Even inside my cabin, the chills seeped through the walls. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, making the house groan under the weight of the storm. But it wasn't just the wind that unnerved me. It was the silence. Outside, I could hear the snow shifting. It didn't sound like regular snow. This wasn't the peaceful hush of a winter storm. No, this was different. It was as if the snow was moving, as if it had purpose. The trees were buried, the roads invisible. And still, the snow kept piling up. There was no relief, no sign of the storm letting up. The quiet outside wasn't comforting, it was ominous. There were no birds, no animals, nothing. Just the sound of snow pressing itself against every surface. I tried to ignore the creeping dread, but the longer I stared out at the drifting snow, the more I felt like it was staring back at me. At first, it was small, a shift in the snow, maybe a trick of the wind. I didn't think much of it. But then the snowdrift grew, becoming something far too deliberate, something far too intentional. The mound, the maw, kept growing, its shape becoming clearer as the hours passed. I couldn't pull my eyes away from it. It was like a massive mouth, frozen in mid-scream, and it was moving toward the town. The next morning, I stepped outside, my boots crunching through layers of snow that had swallowed the streets whole. The town was buried. Every house, every car, everything was smothered beneath it. And the maw. It was taller than the buildings now, and it was moving. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the town was nearly silent, save for hushed whispers among the residents. Some were packing up, others barricading doors. But no one dared to speak too loudly. Everyone was terrified. Everyone was thinking the same thing, what if we're next? I wanted to leave. I should have. But something told me that the moment I stepped out there, the snow would pull me in. The maw was growing, inch by inch, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The deep rumbling I felt beneath my feet was more than just the sound of shifting snow. It felt like the earth itself was groaning, as if the land was alive, caught in the snow's hunger. This wasn't just snow. It was something else, something far more dangerous. It wasn't just the cold. The snow was getting into my head, too. It wasn't enough to just watch it grow, to see it swallow the town. No, the fear came in waves, slowly at first, creeping through my thoughts and into my nightmares. I'd wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the image of the snow's dark mouth still fresh in my mind. I could feel myself trapped inside it, trapped in the gaping maw, unable to escape as the weight of the snow crushed down on me. The worst part was the hunger. It wasn't just the snow that was hungry. It felt like I was hungry, too. Hungry for something, though I couldn't name it. It gnawed at my insides, dragging me deeper into fear. Was it all in my head? Or was the snow truly alive? The maw kept growing, its appetite unyielding. It didn't care about the houses or the trees. It didn't care about the people trapped in its path. It just wanted to consume. And it did. I watched as the snow swallowed houses whole, the walls crumbling under its weight. I saw people disappear, helpless against the snow that pulled them in, their screams cut off as the drift consumed them. That night I heard it, a tapping against my window. Slow, deliberate. I froze, my heart pounding. I looked at the frost on the glass, and for a moment I could have sworn it moved. I turned my head, and there it was. The maw, right at the edge of town. It wasn't just moving toward us anymore, it had arrived. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, but the snow was faster. It was everywhere now. The wind howled, biting at my skin as the snow swallowed everything in its path. I could hear it, feel it like something hungry, something ancient. It wasn't just the snow that was alive. It was the whole town. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the maw, as though the earth had become part of its hunger. I stumbled. The snow was everywhere now, up to my chest, over my head and the maw. It was opening wider. I was going to be swallowed whole. I woke up. My body ached, every bone feeling like it was frozen in place. I wasn't dead, but everything else was. The snow had taken the town, just like it had taken everything else. And as I lay there, buried beneath the snow, I realized something horrifying. The snow wasn't finished with me. Not yet. We had been walking for hours, trudging through snow that didn't seem to end. The storm was relentless, a bitter wind that cut through our jackets and stung our faces. I could feel the cold creeping into my bones, a deep, gnawing cold that made every step heavier. But then, through the swirling white, I saw it, the cabin. It looked like a mirage, a beacon of salvation. Its small, weathered frame sat nestled against the trees, smoke curling from the chimney as though it had been waiting for us. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, but we were too exhausted to care. Inside, the warmth hit us like a wave. The firewood was dry, the scent of cedar wood mixing with the faint mustiness of the space. It was everything we thought we needed. But the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. The air was stale, stagnant, like it had been sealed away for years. And then I noticed them. The footprints in the dust. They weren't ours. The cabin, despite its appearance of safety, was far from a refuge. It was a trap, a force that manipulated and toyed with its guests. The more time you spent inside, the more you became part of it, a piece of its dark history. The footprints in the dust were just the beginning, the first step in a cruel game. No one who entered would ever leave the same way, or perhaps they wouldn't leave at all. It was my decision to keep going. I had insisted, desperate to find shelter before the storm swallowed us whole. Maybe I was trying to outrun something in my own life that I couldn't bear to face. Regret. Guilt. I didn't know what exactly I was running from, but I was sure the storm would catch me if we didn't find somewhere to stop. Laura and Sam, as always, followed me, but their silence told me they didn't feel the same certainty. When we arrived, I could see it in their eyes, fear but not of the storm. No, it was something else. Something in the way the cabin stood, dark and quiet in the middle of nowhere. But I needed this break, I told myself. We all did. But when I noticed the footprints, I didn't want to acknowledge it. Maybe they were just leftovers from the last guests. Maybe they hadn't wiped their feet before leaving. I didn't want to admit that something felt wrong, that something was waiting for us. The cabin was simple. A stone fireplace, mismatched furniture, nothing extraordinary. But as the night pressed on, the air inside began to feel thicker. The walls seemed to close in, as though the cabin itself were holding its breath. Every flicker of the fire sent shadows crawling across the walls, distorting the room. And then there was the smell. At first it was subtle, damp earth, the scent of something rotting faintly beneath the cedar. But as the hours passed, it grew stronger, thicker, like something had been festering for too long. No one said anything. We sat in silence, the wind battering the cabin, but inside it was the kind of silence that gnawed at the soul. Then it began, the whispers. At first I thought it was the wind, but it was different. They came from everywhere and nowhere, seeping through the walls, brushing against my skin like a cold breath just behind my ear. The footprints had already unsettled me, but it wasn't until that night that I realized something was wrong. Laura saw it first. She had been staring out the window, her breath fogging up the glass when she froze. "There's something out there," she whispered. I turned, following her gaze, but all I could see was snow. Thick, unbroken, empty snow, but she was sure. She swore she saw a figure, tall, hunched, its shape just a shadow against the white. Sam, ever the skeptic, dismissed it. "Just the storm. Our eyes are playing tricks on us." But I knew something wasn't right. By morning, the footprints inside the cabin were different. They had multiplied, spread out across the floor in erratic, chaotic patterns. They didn't lead to the door or the windows. They just wandered, twisting in impossible ways. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. But Laura grabbed my arm. "Don't touch them," she whispered. Her voice cracked. The tension in the cabin was unbearable. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind felt deliberate, as if the very cabin was alive, watching us, shifting its weight beneath us. We tried to leave. We had to get out. But the door wouldn't open. We pulled, shoved, kicked, but it was like the wood had grown into the frame. The wind screamed outside, but we were sealed in, as though the cabin had claimed us as its own. Then Sam noticed something else. The footprints weren't just inside anymore. They were outside, too. Tracks in the snow leading to the door, but no tracks leading away. I could feel it now. The presence. It was everywhere, watching, waiting. Something was playing with us, drawing us deeper into its trap. My mind started to blur. Time seemed to lose meaning. Was it night or day? How long had we been here? I started hearing voices. My own voice, whispering questions that had no answers. Was I losing my mind? The longer we stayed, the more everything felt like a distant memory. Laura looked wrong. She seemed to fade, her eyes hollow. Sam grew quieter, more withdrawn. I couldn't remember what we had been talking about when we first arrived. The outside world felt farther away with every passing hour. Had we always been here? Had we ever left? The cabin was breaking us piece by piece, and I knew we weren't supposed to leave. We were part of its story now. The presence inside the cabin wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could explain. It was ancient, something tied to the land itself, a force that thrived on fear, on the unraveling of its guests. It didn't kill quickly. No, it let its prey twist slowly in its grasp, drawing out the terror, the desperation. The footprints were its way of drawing us in. Each new set of prints was like a step deeper into its web, and every time we tried to leave, it was like the cabin tightened its grip on us. It wanted to break us, and it was succeeding. The final night was pure madness. The whispers grew into screams, louder, more frantic. I heard footsteps pacing around the cabin, too many steps for one person. Sam was gone. Laura, she wasn't Laura anymore. Her eyes were vacant, her face pale and gaunt. The door still wouldn't open. The windows were too small to crawl through. We were trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by footprints that weren't ours, the presence closing in with every passing second. The walls, they were moving, shifting. The cabin was shrinking. I couldn't breathe. My heart was in my throat, my body frozen in terror. And then, I don't know how I was outside. I don't know how I made it out. The snow was still falling, suffocating, endless. I turned to look back, hoping to see the cabin behind me, to know I had escaped. But there was nothing. The snow had swallowed it whole. All that was left were the footprints, stretching out from where I had stood, trailing off into the white void. Were we ever inside, or was it all just part of the cabin's story? The night was unnervingly still. The kind of silence that presses in on you like a thick fog, where even the slightest sound feels out of place. I sat by the window, watching the frost creep across the glass in strange, delicate patterns, twisting into shapes that seemed to defy logic, moving and changing as if they had a mind of their own. The house was eerily silent, almost suffocating in its quiet, and the only light came from the street lamp outside, casting a ghostly glow against the snow. I've never liked winter. The cold, the unrelenting darkness, the oppressive silence, it all sets my nerves on edge, but tonight it wasn't just the cold. It was the frost. At first, I thought it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me, a shadow in the corner of my vision. But then I saw it again, a figure, barely there, standing just beyond the frost's frozen veil. It was a faint outline, a smear of something that shouldn't be, but as I stared, it began to take form. The shape became clearer, more distinct until I could see it. Pressed against the glass, its face contorted in an expression I couldn't quite understand, as if it was trying to get in. I froze. The frost had shifted. It wasn't just a harmless pattern anymore, it had become something alive. I wasn't supposed to be here. I told myself that every single day since I moved into this house on the edge of town. The idea was simple. Escape the noise, the crowds, the constant pressure of a life I couldn't manage. I needed peace. Or so I thought. But this house, it had been empty for a reason. The creaks, the drafts, the suffocating stillness, none of it felt normal. It felt wrong. The walls seemed to be watching, waiting. And now this. I thought the isolation would help me heal, that the stillness would quiet the noise in my head. But all it had done was draw me into something far darker, something that I couldn't escape. The frost on the windows was unlike anything I'd seen before. It didn't form in normal patterns. No, it almost seemed to glow faintly at first, then more intensely as the hours passed. It was mesmerizing in a way, almost hypnotic, like staring up at the stars on a moonless night, but wrong. Every now and then I thought I heard the frost crackling, no, not cracking, whispering. The air was cold, impossibly cold, and the silence was suffocating. I couldn't hear the world outside. No passing cars, no rustling of leaves in the trees, just the slow, rhythmic beating of my heart and the soft crackle from the frost, like a distant murmur of voices, too soft to understand but impossible to ignore. And that was when I saw it. At first, it was nothing, just a blur at the edge of my vision. But as I stared, it solidified. A face, distorted, twisted, its features stretched unnaturally, its hollow eyes fixed on me. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was there. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I turned away, trying to shake the image, but when I dared to look again, nothing. Just the frost. The next night, the figures had multiplied. Faces, limbs, shapes that didn't belong pressing against the glass with a terrifying clarity. One face in particular stood out. It had wide, unblinking eyes, its mouth open in a silent scream. No matter where I moved in the room, its eyes followed me. I thought I was losing my mind. I couldn't stop staring at them, though. Each night, the figures became clearer, more defined. They weren't just random patterns. They were deliberate, as if they were trying to convey something. A message. And the more I looked, the more I realized they weren't just faces. They were alive. The whispers from the frost grew louder. I could hear them now, each word a soft plea, look closer. We're waiting for you, but I couldn't stop. I pressed my face closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass, my pulse pounding in my ears. The figures were waiting, their eyes hollow and pleading. They weren't just shapes in the frost, they were memories. People I knew, people I had lost, and one I didn't recognize but whose face haunted me more than all the rest. The days blurred together. I spent hours sitting by the window, transfixed by the figures that pressed against the glass. The house felt colder, darker. The silence deepened, smothering me. The more I stared, the more real they became. "Look closer," they whispered. I didn't want to, I knew I shouldn't, but the pull was undeniable. With each passing night, the figures grew more intricate, more horrifying. Their limbs stretched, twisted, their eyes darker, more hollow. And then it wasn't just the frost anymore. It was the house. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against me. The whispers weren't just voices anymore, they were demands. "We are waiting for you, you can't run, you can't hide." I wasn't just seeing the figures anymore. I was feeling them. Behind me, watching me. Their cold gaze pierced through me, lingering even when I turned away. The frost cracked behind me, louder this time. I spun around, my heart racing, but when I looked, the window was clear. No faces, no figures, just a faint, eerie glow. The house was quiet, too quiet. But I felt it was closing in. I couldn't breathe. I had to know. I pressed my face against the frost, my hands trembling as I felt the cold seep into my skin. The glow from the figures illuminated the room, casting an unnatural light. The faces were real. They weren't figments of my imagination. They were alive, trapped in the frost, their wide, empty eyes pleading for release. Their mouths moved, though no sound escaped. I turned away, but it was too late. The window cracked. The darkness outside poured in, and the figures pressed against the glass, their cold hands reaching out toward me. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, my breath shallow. The house was silent again, too silent. I could feel them, though. I could feel them waiting, watching. I looked at the window. It was clear, but as I stared at the reflection of the room, I saw them. The figures, their black eyes gleaming in the glass. The frost hadn't stopped. They were still inside my mind, waiting for me to look closer. Solo hike turns into a nightmare. I've always found solace in the solitude of hiking. The cold air filling my lungs, the crunch of snow beneath my boots, the unbroken silence of nature. It's a kind of peace I can't find anywhere else. Out here, I'm untethered from the world's chaos. No deadlines, no people, just me and the wilderness. Today is no different. The snow falls thick around me, turning the forest into a sea of white. My breath forms small clouds as I exhale, the air crisp and biting. I'm alone just the way I like it. But then, as I take another step, something catches my eye, a flicker just at the edge of my vision. I stop, turning my head slightly, but there's nothing there. Just the trees standing silent, their branches heavy with snow. I shake it off as a trick of the light, the sun breaking briefly through the clouds before vanishing again. It happens. I've seen it before. I keep walking. But then I notice it again. This time, it's not just a flicker, it's my shadow. I glance down at my feet, expecting to see my outline stretched across the snow. And there it is, except it's wrong. My right leg is bent as I step forward, but the shadow's knee is straight. I stop in my tracks, and so does the shadow. It stands perfectly still as it should, but something's off. The chill crawling up my spine confirms it. I'm imagining things, I tell myself. I've been out here too long. The cold is messing with me. But as I move again, I catch it. My shadow lingers a fraction too long before it follows, like it's hesitating. My pulse quickens. I've trekked through countless mountains, forests, and deserts. I'm used to the solitude, the eerie sounds of nature, the way shadows stretch unnaturally under certain lights. But this is different. The snow begins to fall harder, a thick blanket obscuring the trail ahead. The wind howls in the distance, its mournful cry making the trees creak and groan. I glance behind me. My footprints are the only ones in the snow. I'm alone out here, aren't I? The silence presses in, heavy and oppressive. The only sound is the crunch of my boots and my breathing, now faster than before. I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. The air feels charged, like the forest is holding its breath. And my shadow, it's still not right. I quicken my pace, hoping the movement will calm my nerves. But the faster I walk, the more I notice it. My shadow isn't just following me, it's anticipating me. I turn left and it shifts a moment too soon. I stop suddenly, and for a heartbeat, it stands still before snapping back into place. My chest tightens. I tell myself to stop looking, keep moving. Get to the cabin up ahead, the one I've been using as a waypoint. It's only a few miles away. But even as I force myself forward, I can't help but glance down again, and that's when I see it. My shadow moves on its own. It's subtle at first, a twitch here, a shift there. But then it happens. As I pause to catch my breath, the shadow takes a step forward. Without me, my blood runs cold. I spin around, my eyes scanning the empty forest. Nothing, just the endless expanse of white and the skeletal trees. But when I look back at my shadow, it's no longer just a dark outline. It's stretching, twisting, bending in ways a shadow shouldn't. It's becoming something else. Panic sets in. I've faced plenty of dangers on my hikes, wild animals, sudden storms, treacherous terrain. But this is beyond anything I've prepared for. I start running, the snow slowing my steps, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't care about the trail anymore. I just need to get away. But the shadow stays with me. No matter how fast I move, no matter how many turns I take, it's always there. Sometimes it's behind me, stretching unnaturally long. Other times it's beside me, matching my pace. And then, horrifyingly, it's ahead of me, leading the way. My thoughts are a whirlwind. How is this happening? Shadows don't lead. They don't have minds of their own, and they certainly don't whisper. But I hear it, faint at first like a breath against my ear, then clearer, a voice low and raspy but unmistakably mine. "Come closer!" I stumble, nearly falling face first into the snow. My hands tremble as I push myself upright. The voice repeats, louder this time. "Come closer." Terror grips me. My shadow is no longer just a dark reflection. It's a presence, a thing that moves and breathes and speaks. It's watching me, waiting for me to what? Give in. Let it take me, the cabin. I have to make it to the cabin. It's my only chance. I push forward, every step feeling heavier than the last. The snow seems to cling to me, dragging me down, while the shadow looms larger and darker with every passing moment. Finally, I see it, the cabin's outline through the trees. A surge of hope propels me forward. I reach the door, throw it open, and slam it shut behind me. For the first time in hours, I feel a shred of safety. But then I see it. My shadow, stretching across the walls, its twisted form no longer matching mine. It's there with me, inside the cabin, grinning with a shape that resembles a smile but feels like a predator baring its teeth. And as the whisper returns, I realize the truth. I never escaped. The shadow has been waiting for this moment all along. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the bitter chill of the storm that had swept through the night before. The forest stood still beneath a heavy blanket of frost, each branch outlined in sharp, shimmering white. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked, but there was something else, something deeper, that called to me from beyond the trees. The lake. It had always been there, frozen in time, silent as death. No one ventured onto it, not for years. The locals spoke of it, always in whispers, always with a certain wariness in their voices. They called it cursed, said the ice was unbreakable, and that the lake demanded a sacrifice to remain frozen. But they never told me the full story. Not until now. The lake was a strange thing, hidden deep in the forest, always frozen no matter the winter's severity. The locals claimed it was cursed, its ice thick and unyielding, even when the coldest nights should have shattered it. There was talk of offerings, sacrifices to keep the ice in place, but no one could say exactly what or who the ice claimed. It was just accepted. Curiosity gnawed at me. I thought I'd arrived here to escape the ghosts of my past. But as I approached the lake today, I started to realize the horrifying truth. The lake didn't just freeze water, it froze souls. And the sacrifices were more than simple offerings. They were deals with something ancient, something sinister, and it was my turn to pay the price. My name is Henry. I'm not one to believe in superstitions or curses, but even I couldn't deny the strange weight this place seemed to carry. When I moved to this small town a few weeks ago, I thought it would be a perfect escape, quiet, isolated. I could finally focus on my work, leave behind the painful memories of the past. I lost my wife 2 years ago. The guilt has never left me. I thought I could outrun it, start over somewhere far from those memories. But this town, this lake, this forest, they felt like they were pulling me back. I heard the stories, sure, but I thought they were just that, stories. Not until today. The forest surrounding the lake was eerily quiet, the usual rustling of leaves and chirping of birds completely absent. Even the wind seemed hesitant, afraid to disturb the unnatural silence. The air smelled faintly of pine, but there was something else too, a sharp, metallic scent like iron or blood. It grew heavier with each step I took, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on me. And then there it was, the lake. It lay before me, perfectly still, the surface a flawless mirror reflecting the gray sky above. The ice, thick and unmoving, stretched for miles in all directions. But as I stood there, staring into its depths, I thought I saw something, a dark shape, swirling just beneath the surface. A movement. But when I blinked, it was gone. A crack echoed beneath me, sharp and sudden. The ice shifted. I felt it then. The lake wasn't just frozen. It was watching me. I don't know why I kept walking. Maybe it was the strange pull I felt, or maybe it was the desperate need to outrun my past. But when my foot finally touched the ice, I heard it. A low, eerie groan like the earth itself was waking up. At first, I thought it was just the ice expanding, the wind carrying the sound of the lake shifting beneath its weight. But the creak grew louder, closer. I froze not from the cold, but from the unnatural sound that seemed to come from deep within the lake. I took a step back, my heart pounding. That's when I saw it. A shape, large, undulating beneath the ice, alive. I couldn't move, and then it spoke. "Offer yourself." The voice was low, almost a growl, a whisper carried on the wind. I should have turned away, I should have run. But I couldn't. Something kept me rooted in place, as if the lake itself was holding me there, waiting for me to listen. I stumbled backward, heart racing, but the voice followed me, growing louder, more demanding. "Offer yourself." I tried to rationalize it. It had to be the wind. The cold had warped my senses, made me hear things that weren't there. But as I looked down at the lake, the truth began to seep in. The water wasn't frozen, not in the way I thought it was. The ice wasn't just a barrier. It was alive, and it wanted something from me. I turned, intent on running, but my foot slipped. I crashed to the ice, and in that instant I heard the sound of something cracking, louder, more violent than before. The ice beneath me splintered, spreading out in jagged lines, pulling me toward the center of the lake. I could feel it then. The ice was pulling me down. But then the cracking stopped. A massive form began to rise from the water. It was shadowed at first, but as it loomed closer, I saw it, an ancient, twisted shape, its body covered in dark, shifting tendrils. Something that had been waiting, patient for the right moment. It spoke again. "Your soul is mine." My body locked up. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I felt as though I was being sucked into the ice, my limbs heavy, frozen by an invisible force. The lake wasn't just a body of water anymore. It was alive. It was hungry. The memories of my wife surged to the surface, sharp and painful. The guilt, the feeling that I wasn't enough to save her. Was this what the lake wanted? Was this my punishment? Or was it just the past coming back to claim me? I thought I could escape. I thought I could outrun the past. But the lake, it had claimed so many before me. I saw their faces beneath the ice, screaming, their eyes wide with terror. But no sound ever reached the surface. They were part of it now, and I was next. The tendrils reached for me, wrapping around my body. I could feel the ice, cold and unyielding, pulling me into the depths. I would never escape. The ice closed in around me, freezing my chest, my lungs. I saw the faces of those who had come before me, lost souls trapped beneath the surface. The shadow above me loomed closer, its twisted form shifting, an endless black abyss. It was then I realized the lake didn't just demand a sacrifice. It demanded a soul. It took from anyone who dared trespass, offering nothing but the endless, crushing cold. And now I was part of it. I thought I had been swallowed whole, lost to the lake. But when I opened my eyes, I was back on the shore. The lake was still. The creature was gone. For a moment, I thought I was free. But then the ice cracked again. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. And there in the water, I saw it. My face, twisted in terror, eyes wide with fear. And then I heard it, the same voice whispering again. "Next time, you will join us." It's funny how you can feel so lost in the middle of nowhere, and yet still stumble upon something far worse than the emptiness surrounding you. The snowstorm had swallowed the road, thick and relentless, erasing every landmark, every sign of civilization. The farther I drove, the more isolated I felt, the storm closing in like it had a mind of its own. I didn't mean to stop. I was just trying to outrun the storm, but the engines sputtered and the road became too treacherous to navigate. I had no choice but to pull off into the small town I saw flickering in the distance. I thought I'd find shelter, food, maybe a warm place to wait out the worst of it. I didn't expect to find silence, an oppressive, suffocating silence. The town wasn't just quiet, it was still, frozen in time. Every person, every building, every street was stuck in a moment, as if the entire place had been preserved in amber, untouched and unyielding. People stood in doorways, others caught in mid-laugh or mid-cry, their expressions locked in place. I wandered deeper into the town, each step heavier than the last, the weight of its silence pressing against my chest. What was this place? And why did it feel like something else was watching me? I wasn't supposed to be here. My life back in the city had crumbled, failed relationships, jobs that didn't pan out, everything falling apart at once. I thought the isolation of the open road would give me clarity, a fresh start, or at the very least, some space to breathe. But I didn't expect the storm to drive me into something far darker. When I first pulled into the town, I thought maybe it was just the storm. Everyone had taken shelter inside. But the moment I stepped out of my car, that's when I felt it. The air was wrong. The silence hit me like a slap, cold and uninviting. There was no sound, no wind, no birds. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. The cold here was different. It wasn't just the kind of cold that numbs your skin. It felt like it was pressing against me, suffocating me. The town was too still. As I walked down the main street, the snow crunched beneath my boots, but there was no sign of life. The windows were covered with curtains that looked as if they hadn't been touched in years. The buildings stood over me like silent sentinels, their shapes looming in the dark. I approached a house, drawn by an odd feeling. A woman stood frozen in the doorway, her hand halfway to her mouth as though she'd been about to take a bite of food. Her eyes were wide, locked in terror, her face frozen in time. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, oppressive. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I kept walking, my heart thudding in my chest. Each house I passed had its own frozen moment. Children playing, a man holding a shovel, his body contorted in an unnatural angle. But there was no sound, no life, nothing. I tried knocking on doors, hoping someone would answer. But the houses were locked, the windows dark, empty. I found a small shop at the end of the street, its windows frosted over. Inside, everything was untouched. Shelves lined with cans of food, a dusty counter. But then I saw him, the shopkeeper, standing frozen behind the counter. His hands gripped a receipt, his eyes wide with terror as though he had seen something I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned to leave, but then I heard it. A faint whisper, too soft to make out, coming from behind me. My heart raced as I spun around, but the shop was empty, except for the shopkeeper, still frozen, still lifeless. I could feel it now, the eyes of the town, all of them watching me. The air around me thickened, the silence deafening, and the hairs on my neck prickled. I tried to leave, but the street had changed. The path I had taken was gone, replaced by a fresh layer of snow. Every turn I made led me back to the center of town. The buildings, those silent, watchful structures, seemed to loom closer. I couldn't shake the feeling that the whole place was shifting around me, closing in. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't the storm. It wasn't just the wind or the cold that was making my skin crawl. The longer I stayed, the more the silence gripped me. I could hear voices now, whispers in the wind, my name being called, soft and distant. But when I looked around, there was no one there. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind, but I knew this. The people in this town didn't move. They didn't blink. They were frozen. But somehow it felt like they were still alive, and I felt like they were waiting. Watching, waiting for me. The town had become a trap, its silence a cage that tightened around me with each passing moment. It wasn't just the people who were frozen. It was time itself. And somehow I had become part of it. I could feel it in my chest, a pulse in the very air, as though the town was breathing with me. The silence pressed down harder, each step I took making it harder to breathe. The buildings seemed to lean in closer, their windows dark, their shadows stretching toward me. I ran, desperate, but every street I turned down led me back to the center of town. The frozen townspeople stood there, unmoving, their eyes tracking me. The pressure of their gaze was overwhelming. And then I saw him. At the end of the street, standing in the shadow of a building. A tall man, unmoving, his face obscured by darkness. As I approached, he moved not like a person, but with jerky, unnatural steps, his body twitching and contorting. And then I realized he wasn't frozen. He had been watching me the entire time. He spoke, his voice low and guttural, the words slicing through the suffocating silence. "You can't leave, you never leave." I don't know how much time has passed. The storm is gone, but the snow still falls, thick and endless. I've found myself in a house, whose house I don't know. The whispers have stopped, but I feel them still inside me. I look out the window. The town is unchanged, buried beneath its blanket of snow. I can't leave. They won't let me. The town isn't trapped in time. I am. The lift was unusually quiet that day. I'd ridden it up and down this mountain a dozen times, and I knew every creak of the cables, every hum of the gears. But today felt different. I couldn't explain it, but something was wrong. It wasn't just the dense fog that had rolled in after midday, cloaking the mountain like a heavy curtain. It wasn't the oppressive silence that pressed in on me from all sides, as if the world had been muffled. No, it was the way the lift moved. It felt slower, like it was hesitating, unsure if it should carry me to the top. Almost like it was trying to hold me back. I glanced down. The ground was gone. I'd boarded the lift expecting a peaceful ride up the mountain to get some air, maybe clear my head. But this lift wasn't just taking me up. It was pulling me into something I wasn't prepared for. The fog thickened with each passing moment, swallowing the world below. And as the lift climbed higher, I began to realize there was no top, no destination. I was trapped in a strange, endless void, a fog-covered chasm where reality started to warp. The lift didn't stop, it didn't slow down, and I couldn't escape. I wasn't someone who got scared easily. I wasn't some tourist here for a thrill. I came to the mountain for one reason: to escape. To find some peace, something to help me forget the year that had shattered everything. It's been nearly a year since Mike, my best friend, went missing on a ski trip. The search was a disaster. They never found his body. His disappearance was a hole that no one seemed to care about anymore, but I couldn't let go. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about what happened. So when I saw the chance to go up to the mountain alone, I took it. I thought the isolation would give me the clarity I was looking for. But now, standing on this lift, I started to wish I hadn't come. The ski lift creaked under my weight as I ascended into the mist. The air had a sharp, biting chill to it, colder than usual, like the fog was sucking the warmth out of everything. The usual sounds of the mountain were gone. The wind through the trees, the distant chatter of skiers, even the soft whoosh of skis on snow. All I could hear was the creak of the lift and the rush of my own breath. I looked down again, hoping to see something solid, something that would reassure me. But all I saw was fog. It stretched out into nothingness, the ground swallowed up completely, as if the lift had ascended into a void. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but the fog didn't go away. I felt my stomach tighten, a cold sweat forming on my brow. I turned to look toward the lift operator's cabin, expecting to see someone, anything. But the little hut was lost in the fog, its windows dark, lifeless. My hands gripped the cold metal of the chair, and I felt a tightness in my chest. The lift moved onward, but I felt it, too, the world below me slipping away. I tried to calm myself, rationalize it. Maybe the fog was just thicker than usual. Maybe the lift was malfunctioning. But the more I tried to think it through, the more I couldn't make sense of anything. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat growing faster. I couldn't see anything below. No sign of the resort, no mountain ridges, no landmarks. The lift kept going up, but the world below me had disappeared into the fog. It was as if the mountain had never existed at all. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible. I leaned forward, straining to listen. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. I was imagining things. The wind, the pressure, it was messing with my mind, but then it came again, louder. "Come closer," the voice. It wasn't just the wind. It was familiar. Mike's voice. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted around, but there was nothing. No one, just me, suspended in the thick, choking fog. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty as I gripped the sides of the chair. "Mike!" I whispered. The lift creaked in response, the sound seeming to mock me. "Mike!" I called again, louder this time. The fog swirled around me, twisting, coiling like something alive. Then, through the mist, I saw it, figures, shadows standing just out of reach. Were they people? Were they him? And then, suddenly, the lift stopped. The silence was unbearable. My heart was the only sound I could hear. My breath was shallow, the fog pressing in around me, thickening, suffocating. The whispers came again, this time louder, surrounding me from all directions. Mike's voice, but there was something off about it now. It didn't sound like him. It was distorted, desperate, coaxing me into the fog. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was this really happening? Or was I just losing my mind? My vision blurred, and I shut my eyes, hoping to block it all out. But the fog, no, the air itself, seemed to reach for me. It felt alive. It was pulling me. And then, through the dense mist, I saw it. The lift wasn't climbing anymore. It was descending. I didn't know where the lift was taking me anymore. The higher it went, the more I felt like the world was unraveling beneath me. The whispers, the figures, the shadows, they weren't just memories. They were something else. Something that had been waiting, following me all along. The fog wasn't just fog. It was something else, a barrier between this place and the real world. And I was crossing over. I saw his face. Mike's face, twisted in pain, his eyes pleading with me to come closer. I couldn't. I didn't want to. But the lift began to move again. The chairlift descended again, slowly, agonizingly. Then, through the fog, I saw it. A figure standing still. Not a stranger, not a shadow, but me. My reflection. I reached out, and my reflection moved with me. But as I touched the misty glass, the lift jolted to a stop. The fog cleared. And there, at the bottom of the lift, where the mountain should have been, there was nothing. An endless black abyss. The chairlift was stuck at the edge, dangling precariously over the void. The whispers, the voices, they stopped. A dreadful stillness filled the air. And then the voice came again. "Come closer." I don't know how long I've been sitting here. Time doesn't make sense anymore. The fog is creeping back in, swallowing the world around me. The lift still hasn't moved. The ground is still gone. I don't know where I am or if I'm anywhere at all. It's the same now as it was before, forever suspended, forever waiting. And Mike is still here. We're still here. It started with a single shard of ice hanging from the windowsill, barely noticeable at first. I thought it was a trick of the light, just my mind playing games with the shadows after hours of staring at the frozen window. But when I leaned in closer, I saw it, clear as day, etched into the ice. "Leave!" I froze. No pun intended, but my heart thudded painfully in my chest. The coldness in the room seemed to deepen, suffocating the air. As I stepped closer, the word didn't disappear. It lingered, and more letters began to form, carving themselves from the ice like something alive, something deliberate. "Leave now, don't wait." My skin prickled. I should have known that the moment I stepped into this house, something was wrong. But it wasn't until that moment that I realized I was no longer alone. I'm Sarah, and I've never been great at handling isolation. But that's why I moved here, to get away. After a messy breakup and the loss of my job, I needed space to breathe. I thought a small, remote house in the middle of a frozen wilderness would be the perfect retreat. The silence was supposed to be soothing. It was supposed to reset me. What I didn't expect was to be haunted by the past, by things I couldn't escape. And I certainly didn't expect the ice. I'm a logical person. I always have been. But no amount of logic could explain what was happening here. No amount of reasoning could make sense of the words appearing in the frost, each more unsettling than the last. The cold here is different. It's everywhere, creeping through the walls, seeping into my bones. I've tried to stay warm by the fire, but the house feels colder than it should be. Each room chills me deeper than the next, and I hear things, creaks, soft, deliberate, as if someone is walking just out of sight. The smell of burning wood lingers in the air, mixed with something else. Something metallic. The frost that forms on the windows isn't normal. It moves. It stretches across the glass, then vanishes when I touch it. And the words, God, the words, they're getting worse. "You should not be here. He is coming." Every time I think about leaving, the house feels colder, the walls close and tighter. There's no escape from this place, no matter how hard I try. It starts slow. At first, the words are faint, just little phrases in the bathroom mirror after a shower or a short message on the bedroom window when I wake up. But the more I ignore it, the worse it gets. The chill becomes unbearable, and the messages begin to form with purpose. At first, I tell myself it's nothing. The house is old. It's got weird drafts. But when the ice starts spelling out names, real names, names I haven't thought about in years, that's when I realize I'm not imagining things. James is coming. James, my ex, the one I left behind when I moved here to escape everything. He didn't know where I was. He couldn't. There's no way he could have found me. And yet the ice knew. Why these messages? What is the ice trying to tell me? What does it want? The messages are no longer warnings. They're taunting me. They seem to know things I haven't even thought of yet. They're watching me. It feels like the house is watching me. The moment I stepped inside, I became part of something I don't understand. I try to leave, pack my things, drive away. But the moment I touch the door, the house grows colder. The door won't open. The car won't start. It's as if the ice is holding me here, and the messages, they never stop. It's getting worse. Much worse. One morning, I wake to find my living room window completely covered in jagged, twisting words. The glass is cracking under the weight of them, frost and ice crawling across the surface in unnatural patterns. The air smells like burning snow, and I can hear footsteps, slow, deliberate on the stairs. I'm not alone anymore. The frost on the wall shifts, changes. The words become more cryptic, as if the house itself is speaking to me, pushing me to confront something I don't want to face. I've lost track of time. I'm not sure if days are passing or if I'm trapped in some kind of endless loop. The voices in the house, the chill, the ice, they're all growing louder. I can't tell if they're real or if I'm losing my mind. But the one thing I do know, I can't leave. The ice, the house, it's not just a warning. It's feeding on me, drawing me in. The messages are no longer vague, they're personal. "He's coming for you." The voice I'm hearing isn't just a voice, it's him. It's James. But it's not just James anymore, it's something else. Something older, something darker that has been waiting for me. The ice is a signal, a beacon. And it's drawing him closer. I realize too late that James isn't just coming. He's already here. The storm hits that night. The wind howls outside, shaking the walls, and then, suddenly, the power cuts. The house goes pitch black, and the ice grows thicker, harder, like it's becoming more intense with every passing second. He knows what you did. He's been watching. I don't know who's watching anymore. Is it James, the house, or something worse? The walls feel like they're closing in, and the air is thick with a presence I can't name. I've made a mistake. There's no way out. The door bursts open, but no one is there. The next morning, I try to leave. The storm has passed. The snow is fresh outside, undisturbed. But when I step outside, something feels wrong. The house. It's not my house anymore. The ice on the windows is gone, but the silence is deafening. The messages have stopped, but there's something else now. Something cold, something ancient. Waiting in the corner of the room, just beyond my sight, I turn to run, but then I hear it one last time. It's too late. It started like any other snowstorm. At first, a few delicate flakes drifting down from the sky, then a gust of wind, and suddenly everything was covered in a thick white blanket. We were on our way home from a weekend getaway in the mountains, just me, my best friend Jessica, and her husband, Matt. The kind of trip meant to shake off the stress, to clear our heads. But the storm came in fast, fierce. The roads became slick, almost impassable, and it wasn't long before we pulled over at the nearest rest stop. A small, run-down diner that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The wind was howling now, and the snow piled up quickly outside, completely blocking the view from the windows. By the time we sat down, we all knew. We were stuck here for the night. But we weren't just stuck. The storm wasn't the only thing keeping us here. The storm wasn't natural. It wasn't just snow and wind, it felt wrong. And the longer we stayed in that diner, the more I realized something. We weren't just trapped by the snowstorm. We were stuck in it. In time. Every time the clock struck 2:15 p.m., everything would reset. The diner, the storm, us. The same sequence of events would play out over and over, and nothing we did would change it. The storm wasn't a force of nature. It was a force of malice, feeding on our fear, twisting our minds, locking us into its grip. The worst part, we couldn't escape. The terror grew with every loop. I was exhausted. We all were. The storm had thrown off our plans, and the diner, as unwelcoming as it was, became the only place we could go. I didn't want to be here. I'd come with Jessica and Matt to escape life for a few days, but that's not why I was running. I was running from the ache I couldn't shake, the heaviness in my chest, the loss I hadn't healed from. Every day felt like a repeat of the last, endless work, endless disappointment. The storm gave me a reason to pause, to breathe for a second, but all it did was trap me, trap all of us. I could feel it now. The storm was more than just weather. It was something darker, and no one else seemed to see it. The diner was small, run down, and felt like it had been forgotten by time. The neon sign outside flickered in the storm's darkness, casting an eerie red glow through the windows. Inside, the warmth from the old heater felt almost too hot, making the air heavy and suffocating. The jukebox in the corner was playing the same song over and over, a cheerful tune that felt out of place, like someone forgot to turn it off decades ago. The walls were peeling, the posters faded, and there was a faint metallic smell in the air, mixing with the lingering aroma of stale coffee. The diner felt dead, like no one had entered in years, except for us. We ordered coffee, sat down by the window, and stared out into the swirling storm. Snow was falling harder now, chaotically, as though the storm itself had a mind. And then it happened. I can't explain it, but I know it was real. One minute I was sitting at the booth, trying to push my dark thoughts away with my coffee, and the next I was standing at the door, staring out into the snow. The wind had calmed, the storm still raged, but there was no sign of any snowplows or any change outside. Everything was the same. I turned around, expecting to see Jessica and Matt, but the scene had frozen. Jessica was sitting at the booth, sipping her coffee like nothing had changed. Matt was reading the newspaper like a loop I couldn't break. And then I noticed something, the clock. It read 2:15 p.m. I stared at it, my heart dropping. I had checked the clock just a few minutes ago. It had been the same time, but no one else seemed to notice. The day began to repeat itself, over and over. At first, I thought maybe we were all just overtired, or maybe I was seeing things. But then the pattern became undeniable. Every time the clock hit 2:15, everything reset. The diner, the storm, us. We couldn't break the cycle. I tried talking to Jessica, but she just smiled at me like she hadn't heard a word. Matt didn't even seem to register me anymore. He just kept reading, eyes blank. The storm didn't stop. The wind grew louder, the snow thicker, and every time the clock ticked toward 2:15, I felt the air around us growing heavier, thicker with dread. We were trapped. The diner was locked in time. And it wasn't just the storm. There was something else, something watching us, something listening to our every move. Something I couldn't see, but I could feel it. Time lost meaning. I couldn't tell how many loops had passed, but I could feel the terror building inside of me. The fear wasn't just mine. It was in Jessica's eyes now. At first, she didn't believe me when I told her what was happening, but as the loops stretched on, I could see the cracks. She started speaking about things that hadn't happened yet, details of events I hadn't even considered, but somehow she knew them. Matt. Matt was becoming hollow. Each reset drained him more. He would stare out the window like he was looking at something I couldn't see. "Why are we here?" he would ask, his voice flat, distant. "Why does it keep happening?" I didn't know, and I didn't know how to answer. The storm kept resetting, but the terror inside us never stopped. It only grew. Then one night, or was it morning, the storm didn't just reset, it shifted. At first, it was just a shadow outside the diner, but then it moved. Slowly, deliberately. A figure. Tall, twisted, its body shimmering against the blinding white storm. It was unnatural, something made of shadow and ice, its movements unsettling. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat was frozen. I looked to Jessica, to Matt, but they were staring blankly out the window, eyes wide in a way I didn't understand. The figure was getting closer. It knew we were trapped, and it knew we were afraid. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. I threw myself against it, but it was locked. I could hear the wind howling now, like some beast trying to break through the walls. The figure was just outside, its shadow stretching through the glass. It was wrapping around us, tightening its grip. And then everything went quiet. The storm stopped. The wind, the howling, the figure, all of it fell into a suffocating silence. The clock. It read 2:15 again. We were back where we started. But I wasn't the same. I understood now. The storm wasn't just trapping us in time, it was feeding on us, on our fear. The more terrified we became, the longer it lasted. I could feel it inside me now. The storm wasn't just around us. It was inside. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. A retreat from the noise, the grind, the constant pressure of our everyday lives. A group of us, 4 friends decided to rent a cabin high in the mountains, far from everything. No phones, no distractions, just a quiet, simple getaway. But the storm that hit that night, that changed everything. The cabin was wrong from the start. At first, I thought maybe it was just a quirky place, one of those hidden gems that no one talks about. It had no listing on any map, no address, no website. The brochures didn't mention it. Yet, as the blizzard thickened around us, we thought it was the perfect spot for a getaway. We had no choice but to take refuge inside, not knowing that the shelter we thought we'd found was more like a trap. What we didn't realize then was that we just walked into a nightmare. I'm Mia, and honestly, I should have known better. I've always been the cautious one in the group, the one who double-checks everything. The route, the weather. The maps, but this cabin, I couldn't find it anywhere. I tried, I really did, but nothing matched up. I warned the others, I told them not to be careless, but they brushed me off, saying I was being paranoid. Now I wish I was. I've always had a feeling, an unsettling sense that something terrible is always just waiting for the right moment to strike. Maybe it's the things I've seen. Maybe it's the strange dreams that never quite leave me, or maybe it's just the way this cabin feels like it's alive. Its walls breathing, shifting. It's not just the storm outside, it's something inside too, something far darker than the cold. The snow is coming down in thick sheets outside, but inside the cabin, it's colder than it should be. The air is thick, heavy. The wood creaks with every gust of wind, but it's not the wind I'm worried about. I keep hearing something else. Footsteps, but they're not from outside. No, these are inside the cabin. The floorboards groan beneath me like something is waiting. The air smells stale, like old dust and mildew. Each breath feels like it's clogging my chest. The walls, they pulse. I can't explain it, but I feel it every time I move. And then the whispers. Just faint, far-off voices like they've been trapped here forever, lost to time. The storm outside grows louder, but here it feels like it's inside with us too. At first, it's just little things. Nothing major. The lights flicker. The fireplace refuses to stay lit. The door that we locked. Somehow it's ajar. I catch my friends glancing at each other nervously, but no one says anything. We try to stay calm, we try to stay normal. But the more we try to reassure ourselves, the more wrong everything feels. And then it happens. We hear footsteps in the snow outside, faint and slow. But when we open the door, there's nothing. Just a blank stretch of snow and the blizzard. The storm is intensifying, the wind howling louder. The air is thick, pushing back against us like the world itself is against us. None of us can remember how we even got here. As the hours pass, things get worse. We try to leave, but it's impossible. Every time we step outside, the snow swallows us whole. We end up right back at the cabin as though we've never left. But this time, something's different. The cabin has changed. It's not the same. A hallway that didn't exist before, a door in the corner that wasn't there. And the worst part, the photographs on the walls. People I don't recognize, faces of people who should not be here. The walls are closing in, and we're not even sure what time it is anymore. Day and night have merged, and the only thing that feels real is the gnawing dread deep in my chest. What if we've been walking in circles? What if we've never left? The terror starts eating at us, like a slow burn, pulling at our sanity. At first, I feel it. Those creeping sensations of guilt, like we did something to deserve this. Is this punishment? Are we being tested? I don't blame my friends for getting paranoid. We all are. The mirrors distort reality. I can't even look at myself anymore without wondering if I'm seeing what's truly there. And the whispers, God, those whispers, they never stop. Are they real? Are they just in my head? I can't trust anyone, not even myself. It's not just the house playing tricks on us, it's the storm too. The wind never stops. It howls in ways that feel deliberate. Every time we try to escape, every time we venture out, we're pulled back into the same place, the same cabin. And as we search, we realize something worse. This cabin, this storm, this place, they're all part of something bigger. Something older. This land shouldn't exist. The mountains shouldn't be here. The air around us, it's wrong. And it doesn't just want us here. It needs us here. The tension finally breaks when one of my friends, Jason, disappears. We call his name frantic, but the storm's howl drowns everything out. We search everywhere. Everywhere. Then we find it. A mirror, a hidden room, and inside it, there's Jason, but not Jason. His eyes are hollow, lifeless, and behind him a figure, shrouded in black, its form twisted in a way that isn't human. The storm outside intensifies. The walls begin to crack. And that's when we realize, whatever is here, it's not just the cabin. It's following us. We tried to escape, we thought we could. But every time we left, we ended up back where we started. The doors locked. The walls are closing in. Jason's gone, replaced by something else. And then it hits me. The awful truth. There's no escape. We never left. We were never meant to leave. And now we are part of this place. The snowstorm hit without warning. 1 minute the sky was clear, and the next the wind began to howl and the temperature plummeted. I was used to winter in the mountains, used to the way the snow would blanket the world in silence. It had always felt peaceful to me, a welcome solitude. But this storm was different. There was something unnatural in the air. Even before the wind picked up, even before the temperature dropped, I felt it, a sense of something shifting, something not quite right. It started with a sound, a soft, haunting melody carried by the wind. At first, I thought it was the wind, just the storm itself making strange noises. But then the melody grew clearer, more distinct. It was a woman's voice, pure and haunting, like a lullaby sung by the wind itself. It was the kind of voice that could wrap you in a trance, make you forget everything around you. I told myself I was imagining it. I was alone, isolated in this cabin, surrounded by miles of snow-covered wilderness. It had been days since I last saw another soul. Maybe I was just losing touch with reality. But the longer I listened, the more real it became. The voice wasn't in my head. It was out there, outside the cabin, drifting through the storm, pulling me, and for the first time in years, I couldn't resist. My name is Ethan. I've always been the type of guy who craved silence, who found peace in isolation. I moved up here to get away from the noise of the world, to find a quiet place where I could think, breathe, and leave behind the memories that weighed me down. I thought a few weeks in this remote cabin would be the perfect escape, but something felt different now. The storm, the song, the strange pull in my chest, it was all too much. It wasn't just the isolation anymore. It wasn't just the wind howling outside. Something else was out there. Something was calling me, and I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. I didn't believe in ghosts or legends. I'd never given much thought to old mountain tales. But with each passing minute, the song grew louder, and I began to question everything I knew. There was no turning back. The wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the walls like the storm was trying to break in. Inside, it was warm. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the otherwise quiet cabin. I sat by the fire, the warmth seeping into my bones, trying to ignore the mounting sense of unease. Then there it was again. The song. It floated in on the wind, so faint at first that I thought I might have imagined it. But no, it was there. Clearer now, like a ribbon of sound winding through the storm. The melody, sweet, haunting, almost tragic, wrapped around me like velvet. It was soothing, yes, but there was a darkness lurking beneath it, a weight to the sound that I couldn't quite shake. I tried to tell myself it was the wind playing tricks on me, the storm's howl weaving through the trees. But the song was different, too deliberate, too human. It wasn't the storm anymore. The storm had become part of the song. And the voice, it was calling me. I stood up, unsure of what I was doing. The fire crackled behind me, warm and inviting, but the pull of the song was stronger. I grabbed my coat and opened the door. The cold hit me like a slap in the face, sharp and immediate. But I couldn't turn back. Not now. The song was too clear, too strong. The snow was thick, swirling in violent clouds, the wind howling, but there it was, the voice still guiding me. Every step I took felt heavier, the storm pressing in, yet the melody kept me moving forward. I didn't know where it was leading me, but I couldn't stop walking. The storm was no longer a threat. It had become part of the music, part of the pull that tugged at my chest. With each step, the melody grew louder, more urgent, more desperate. The snow was up to my knees now, the world around me a white blur. The wind had swallowed everything else. There was nothing but the song. The storm had faded into the background, just part of the haunting lullaby that now consumed me. I tried to resist. I tried to turn back, but my feet kept moving. The voice, it was no longer a gentle song, but a command, a demand. I had no choice but to follow. The world around me, the snow, the wind, it was all gone now. There was only the music. My breath came in shallow gasps, but I was calm, too calm. The closer I got, the more at ease I felt. I was losing myself in it, in her. But something deep inside screamed at me that this wasn't right. I felt dizzy, the wind cutting through my clothes, the snow deepening with every step. My feet sank with each movement, and the melody, the voice, was louder now, like it was coming from inside my head. I was calm, but it was too calm, a cold serenity that settled over me like a shroud. I tried to rationalize it. It was just the storm, just the isolation messing with my mind. But no, the voice, the melody, it wasn't a product of my imagination. It felt too real, too alive. I had heard the old stories, the ones about sirens, creatures who used their voices to lure sailors to their deaths. But this wasn't the sea. This was the mountains. This was land and still. The pull was undeniable. The voice, it wrapped around me like a dark embrace, pushing me forward, urging me on. I no longer cared where I was going. I just needed to follow. Then, through the storm, I saw her. A figure, vague, ethereal, standing at the edge of a cliff. Her silhouette barely visible through the swirling snow. Her hair moved as if caught in an invisible wind, and her face, I couldn't see it clearly, but I felt it, her eyes on me, watching. The song stopped. The world went quiet. The storm ceased, the wind no longer howling. The silence was deafening. I froze, unable to move. There was no sound, no movement, but I wasn't alone. I could feel her presence waiting for me. The figure moved, her head tilting slightly as if studying me. Her voice, so sweet, so calm, reached me through the stillness. "Come closer," she whispered. I felt my feet move of their own accord, the pull of her voice stronger than anything I had ever felt. I stepped forward, despite every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn around, to run back to the safety of the cabin. But I couldn't. The music, the melody, was still in my ears. It was everything. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, the snow crunching beneath me. The edge of the cliff was so close now. I could see the drop, the endless white below. Just a little closer. And then I understood I wasn't walking toward her. I was walking toward the edge. The wind howled again, the cold seeping through my skin, but I was already there on the edge. One more step and I'd be gone. I blinked and the figure was gone. But the song, it was still there, in my ears, in my mind. Come closer, I looked down. It was too late, I had already fallen. The storm hit without warning. I had been walking for hours, each step slower than the last. My breath fogged up in front of me, the freezing air biting at my skin. The trail had disappeared. What had once been a narrow path was now just an expanse of white. The snow was relentless, a heavy blanket that seemed to swallow everything, even the sound of my own footsteps. The wind screamed through the trees, sharp and cutting, stripping away any hope of warmth. I should have turned back, but I didn't. I couldn't. There was something in me, something desperate pushing me forward. Maybe it was the need for answers. Maybe I thought I could outrun what was chasing me. The storm or myself. I thought I could make it, but the storm had other plans. That's when it started. I heard it, a voice faint, almost lost beneath the howling wind. My name. It called to me. In the heart of a snowstorm, a lone traveler is drawn toward an unknowable force, a voice that beckons him deeper into the blizzard. The storm isn't just weather. It's alive. A malevolent presence that manipulates the elements to trap its prey. The snow whispers secrets from the past, luring those who listen into an endless void, where the boundaries between what has been and what is yet to come blur into one. The voice isn't a warning. It's a trap. I wasn't anyone special, just a man walking through life like anyone else. There was no grand adventure for me, just a journey to escape. Maybe I was trying to outrun memories that wouldn't let go. I had lost someone, her, or maybe I hadn't lost her at all. The lines were starting to blur. I never meant to be out here lost in the snow. But the storm wasn't the only thing that had trapped me. My own decisions, the weight of the past, had led me here too. I heard it again, the voice. Louder now, clearer, it was her. I tried to ignore it. I wanted to, but I couldn't. The snow was everywhere. It wasn't just a storm, it was suffocating. Thick, heavy, as if the world itself had been buried under a blanket of white. The wind shrieked around me, but there were moments of unnerving stillness. In those moments, it was like the storm was holding its breath. The air was sharp, biting, the cold seeping through my clothes. My boots crunched through the snow, each step dragging more than the last, and then I heard it. The voice. At first, it was barely a whisper, lost in the wind. But then it grew stronger, clearer. It was calling my name like a forgotten memory clawing its way back into my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind. But then, the snow began to shift. My footprints, my tracks were gone, vanished. There was no going back now. I paused, heart pounding. Was it really her? Or was it just my mind playing tricks on me? I turned, hoping to see her standing there, her face in the snow, her smile like it used to be. But no. The blizzard pressed in, an impenetrable wall of white. The cabin I had passed was miles behind me. It was too late. The wind howled again, but this time it wasn't just the storm. It was a laugh, a low, mocking laugh. My pulse quickened. I opened my mouth to call back, to demand answers, but no sound came. Then another voice joined the first, and another. They spoke in unison, calling my name, murmuring in strange tones. They weren't her, but they sounded like her. They told me things I didn't want to hear, things I didn't understand, but I kept walking. Then I saw it. A light, faint and flickering in the distance. It could have been salvation, or it could have been a lure. I stumbled toward the light, barely able to see through the storm. As I neared, the shapes emerged, figures, faces pressed against the veil of snow. They were people, or something like them. Their eyes wide, staring, pleading. Were they real? Were they alive? Or were they echoes? I couldn't tell. The voices were louder now, swirling around me until the storm itself felt silent in comparison. It was no longer the wind. It was them, the lost ones, the ones who had wandered into the storm before me. I reached out, desperate for connection. The light wasn't a light. It was a hole. A void in the snow, dark and stretching downward, deeper than anything should be. The storm wasn't just a storm. It was alive. And it had always been alive, waiting for someone like me to wander in, to lose their way, to listen to the voices. I had heard them before, years ago. The same voice, calling me to the same place. But I hadn't listened. Not then. This time I did. And now I understood. It wasn't her. None of them were real. They were all just traps, echoes of the past that lured the lost further into the storm. The storm itself was its prison, its playground. And now I was part of it. The blizzard wasn't just weather. It was a force, a mind of its own, built from the lost souls of those who had wandered into its grasp. It could take any shape it needed, mimic anyone to draw its prey deeper. The voice was its weapon, its lure. The real terror wasn't the cold, the snow, or the blinding white. It was the voices, insistent, persistent, pulling me further into their endless void. I wasn't alone, and I never would be. I was standing at the edge of the void now. The voices screamed, unbearable, drowning out everything else. The air was thick with frost, my skin numb from the cold. I was drawn forward, closer to the hole, as if some unseen force was pulling me in. And then I saw her. Her face twisted in the darkness, smiling at me from the depths of the storm. I reached for her, my fingers shaking, but her eyes were empty. Hollow. The snow shifted again, and I realized she had never been real. None of them were. I stepped forward, and then I was falling, weightless, into the void. But just before I hit the ground, I saw something that froze me. Another figure stumbling through the snow. It was me. The echo of my own lost soul, still wandering, still searching. The silence of the frozen lake was deafening. I had driven for hours, seeking the solitude that only a remote place like this could offer. A perfect escape from the noise of the world. The cold, sharp, and unforgiving wrapped around me like an old wound. I thought the stillness would help me clear my mind. But then I saw him. An old man, his face weathered and cracked like the ice itself, sitting by a fishing hole. His back was hunched, but his presence was commanding, as though he were part of the lake itself. The wind seemed to bend around him, as if it, too, feared disturbing his peace. I stopped a few yards away, unsure whether to approach or leave him to his solitude. But he didn't need to look at me. He already knew why I was there. "Don't step too close to the holes in the ice," he said, his voice like gravel scraping against the earth. His eyes didn't meet mine. They didn't have to. The warning was as old as the lake itself. "The lake doesn't forgive." I smiled awkwardly, dismissing him as just another old man in a place too quiet for his own good. "I'm just here to fish," I said. He finally looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. I froze. He wasn't talking about fishing. I had come to the lake to escape. A failed relationship. A broken family. Life had worn me down, and I thought the isolation would heal me. But the moment I saw that old man, I felt the first shiver of something darker. He warned me of a creature beneath the ice, a monstrous thing that dragged the living into the depths. It hunted those who didn't respect the lake's power, its ancient claim over the land. The creature was never fully seen, only hinted at, lurking in the dark waters beneath. But there was something more, something that tied the lake and the creature together. The lake was alive, and it had been waiting for me. I hadn't wanted to be here, but what other choice did I have? My life had fallen apart in every way it could. My ex, my family, the constant pressure to fix myself when I didn't even know what was broken. I thought if I could just get away from everything, from everyone, I might find a way to heal. But as I stared at the old fisherman, his warning replaying in my mind, I knew this place was different. Something wasn't right. He didn't seem like the type to entertain nonsense, but I shrugged it off. Just a lonely old man, I muttered to myself. What does he know? And yet, something about the way he looked at me made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The ice creaked beneath me as I moved forward. The wind cut through my jacket as I stepped onto the frozen lake. The air smelled sharp, like frozen earth and cold metal. The vast emptiness stretched out in all directions. The snow pure and untouched except for the occasional scuff of someone else's boots. His boots. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, even as I stepped farther out, the silence amplifying with every step. There was no sound, no birds, no hum of distant cars, just the slow, groaning creaks of ice underfoot and the occasional snap of fishing line in the wind. Then I felt it, a subtle vibration beneath my feet. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the ice shifting. It was something else, something alive. I set up my fishing hole, trying to push away the sensation that the lake was watching me. The old man's warning echoed in my mind, but I laughed it off. People say all kinds of things out here. Maybe he had just been talking about the dangers of thin ice, or the weight of too many layers of snow on top of it. But the longer I sat, the more I felt the ice moving beneath me, as if something were pushing against it. Not in a natural way. No, this was wrong, alive. My heartbeat quickened as the sensation grew, a pulse vibrating under the ice, resonating in my chest. The hole seemed to stare at me, daring me to reach into the cold dark below. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. Something was pulling me closer. The crack came suddenly, sharp and jarring. I froze, heart in my throat. The sound hadn't come from above. No, it was something deeper, something below the surface. The water beneath the ice shifted, then splashed. Heavy, too heavy, like something large was moving, but the lake was still. No ripples, no movement. The wind howled around me, and for a moment I thought I might be imagining it. Then it happened again. Another splash. The ice groaned, bending under a pressure I couldn't see. I grabbed the fishing pole instinctively, pulling it in. But then I felt it. A tug, cold, sharp. Something pulling at my line from below, dragging it toward the depths. My hands froze as I tried to reel it in, but it was no use. The line snapped in my hands and something unseen yanked harder, pulling the pole toward the gaping dark beneath. I backed away, my breath coming out in sharp, panicked bursts. The ice beneath my feet felt wrong, thin, fragile, as though the very ground beneath me might give way at any moment. I glanced over my shoulder, but the fisherman was gone. His bucket, his chair, everything was empty. A patch of yellowed snow marked where he had once sat. The warning wasn't just about the fish. It wasn't about the ice at all. It was the lake itself. The lake that was alive, and it wanted something from me. I heard them then, voices, whispers rising and falling with the wind, not human, not animal, something older, darker. The more I listened, the closer they called, tugging me toward the hole in the ice where the lake waited. It wasn't a creature, not in the way I thought. It was something far older, an ancient force, hungry and eternal, waiting beneath the ice. I had disturbed it. I was part of its game now. I hadn't heard the ice crack, not at first. It wasn't until I saw it that I realized the danger. A bulge, slow and deliberate, began to rise from the frozen surface. The ice groaned, scraping, shifting as something, pushed upward, massive, dark, and shifting too quickly for me to understand. I staggered back, slipping on the frozen ground. The ice cracked beneath my weight, groaning like it was coming apart from within. I tried to run, but it was too late. The ice shattered. A deafening crack split the silence, and the lake roared to life. The water burst up like an old wound opening, and for a moment I thought I saw it. A dark shape, too large, too monstrous to comprehend, surging up from below. I didn't have time to scream. The frozen water rushed toward me, cold, thick, and alive, pulling me into its depths, into darkness. I woke to warmth, to crackling firelight. The smell of burning wood, the heat against my skin. My body ached, but it wasn't from the cold. No, it wasn't cold at all. I sat up, disoriented. The old fisherman was there, sitting across from me. His expression was unreadable, his eyes darker than before. "Not many make it back," he said quietly, his voice like the sound of dry leaves scraping across the ground. "But you did." I wanted to ask him why, what had happened. But I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, my body stiff. And as I looked down, I saw it, the ice. Beneath the surface, still there, still waiting, and with a cold knot in my stomach, I realized I hadn't escaped. The lake wasn't done with me, not yet. I've always known that the forest was a dangerous place. My father used to warn me, stories of hikers gone missing, of strange noises echoing in the trees at night. But this was something else entirely. The storm came without warning, a sudden wall of snow that hit so fast it left me disoriented and panicked. One moment I was trudging through the familiar path, the next whiteout. My heart raced as the temperature dropped, and I had no choice but to find shelter. It wasn't long before I stumbled into a small clearing, the trees towering over me like skeletal giants. Their branches were thick with frost, their trunks coated in layers of ice. The ground was slick beneath my boots, each step a struggle against the frozen earth. But it wasn't just the cold that made my skin crawl. No. The trees weren't just frozen. They were breathing. I didn't know what it was, some curse, some twisted version of time, or just the nature of this forest. But the deeper I went, the more the trees seemed to come alive. The air hung heavy, still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And though the wind howled through the branches, I could hear something else, something beneath it. Soft, rhythmic breathing, like lungs filling with the frigid air. Then I saw them. Frozen creatures suspended in ice. Some were animals, their eyes wide with terror. Others were human, and that's when it hit me. I didn't want to look too closely, but I couldn't stop myself. Their bodies were encased in thick layers of ice, perfectly still. But their chests, they rose and fell just like mine. They were alive. I'm Jack. I came here alone, seeking answers. The forest had always intrigued me. There were rumors, whispers about people vanishing without a trace. At first, I thought I was prepared for the isolation, for the cold. After all, I had spent years researching, studying the forest's history, its secrets. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I thought the storm was to blame. Maybe the wind had played tricks on my mind. But then I saw it. A man, or what was left of him. His skin was nearly covered in frost, his body twisted in a grotesque position, frozen in the middle of a scream. I froze, my legs refusing to move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed, unable to tear my eyes away from the nightmarish sight before me. I couldn't escape. The cold seeped into my bones, suffocating, a presence I couldn't escape. The air smelled of damp earth and frost, and a faint, rancid odor lingered, something rotten. I tasted the ice in the air, sharp and bitter, like it was eating me from the inside. Each step was slower than the last, the snow crunching beneath my boots, and every breath felt like I was inhaling needles. And those frozen creatures, those eyes, hollow and lifeless, followed my every movement. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked closely enough, they might blink or worse, reach out. The wind whistled between the trees, but there was something else. A low, almost inaudible hum vibrating through the ground. The trees groaned, their frozen bark scraping against each other like they were whispering, speaking to each other, waiting for something. The further I ventured, the more the forest twisted. The trees, now contorted and grotesque, took on strange shapes, almost humanoid. Their branches reached out like skeletal arms, bent into unnatural angles. I couldn't look away, though every instinct told me to run. The deeper I went, the more creatures I saw, frozen, every one of them alive. Some were small, some large. None were still, and that's when I saw it. A figure. An enormous woman draped in layers of ice. Her hair was a tangled mess of frozen strands, her eyes wide open in eternal terror. She stood at the center of a clearing, perfectly still, yet her chest rose and fell just like the others. She was alive. I knew I should have run, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey. My legs were frozen, my mind trapped in place, paralyzed by a feeling I couldn't explain. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, and a chill spread through my chest. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, yet I heard her. "Help me!" The words were faint, almost drowned by the howling wind, but they reached me, a breath carried on the icy breeze. I could see her mouth move, but I didn't know if it was real or if the storm had begun to play tricks on me. Suddenly, the air shifted. The wind picked up, the trees creaked louder, and that hum beneath my feet turned into a deafening roar. The forest was no longer still, it was alive. The creatures, hundreds of them, began to stir. Slowly at first, but then faster, their eyes blinking, their limbs twitching. The ice began to crack. I tried to back away, but the ground beneath me shifted. The forest was closing in. I didn't know if I was dreaming or losing my mind. The wind howled, the trees swayed, and the creatures, frozen yet alive, began to chant. Their voices were guttural, foreign, unintelligible, but the meaning was clear. They wanted me. They wanted me to join them. I felt the forest's breath against my skin, cold and heavy. The creatures, grotesque, some half-human, others barely recognizable, moved closer. Their eyes were hungry, empty, their mouths agape. The woman in the center of the clearing reached out a frozen hand, her fingers cracking with the movement. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My legs refused to move. My body refused to obey. One by one, they began to crawl toward me, half-human, some barely more than shadows. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. The ice didn't just trap them. It was feeding them. And I was next. I couldn't move. The creatures surrounded me, their icy breath seeping into my skin. The woman's voice whispered again, louder now, sending a chill straight to my soul. "Join us!" The ground cracked beneath me. I felt myself fall into the cold, into the void. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the forest itself. its eyes, countless eyes, staring down at me with hunger. I woke up in the clearing, my body cold, my breath shallow. The storm had passed, the forest still. The creatures were gone, but I could feel it, the eyes. They were watching me. I turned to the frozen pool beside me, dreading what I might see. My reflection stared back at me, pale, covered in frost, chest rising and falling slowly. And that's when I realized I was one of them now. The wind howled outside the cabin, rattling the thin walls and making the windows tremble. I wasn't supposed to be here. I never wanted to be here. But somehow the storm found me. It wasn't supposed to follow me, but it did. And now it's closer than ever. I can feel it in the air. The temperature drops by degrees that aren't natural. The pressure builds with every breath I take. It's not just the wind anymore. It's something else, something darker. No matter how far I go, no matter where I hide, it's always right behind me, always watching. And then it speaks. This isn't just a storm. It's not just weather. The snowstorm is alive, a sentient, malevolent force that has been hunting me for days. No matter how far I run, how many miles I put between myself and it, I hear it. The wind, the whispers, always calling, always closing in. The storm isn't just about the cold. It's about the past I can't outrun. It's about my choices, the things I left behind, the people I hurt. The storm is me, my guilt, my shame, and it won't stop until it's consumed me entirely. Call me Aaron, and I've been running for days. I didn't know it would come to this, but here I am, hiding in a cabin with the storm creeping closer. I keep thinking I can outrun it, thinking if I keep moving, if I just get far enough away, it will disappear. But it's always there. The whispering, the cold. The storm, the guilt, the memories, they won't let me go. I've been running my whole life, from mistakes, from pain, from the things I did, the things I left behind. I thought I could escape them, but now I realize I can't. Not anymore. The storm isn't just out there. It's inside me. The cabin creaks under the weight of the wind, the walls shaking as if they're trying to hold themselves together. Outside, the snow falls in thick sheets, swallowing up everything in sight. The world beyond the cabin is a blur of white, the landscape erased by the storm's rage. But inside, the air is still, almost suffocating. I can feel it, the cold that isn't from the weather but something deeper, something that presses against my skin. The pressure in the room grows heavier with each passing minute, as if the storm is inside with me, clawing at the walls, getting closer. And then the whisper. It's low and cold, not from outside this time. It's inside, right beside me. Aaron! I don't know how long I've been running. Days, hours, time doesn't matter anymore. The storm is always there, closing in with each step I take. I drove until the road ended, ran until I couldn't run anymore. I thought I could hide at abandoned houses, barns, forests. But no matter where I went, it found me. Always. And now it's here. I can hear it now, the voice. Soft at first, then louder, as if it's inching closer with every passing second. I try to block it out. I try to convince myself it's just the wind, just the storm, that I'm imagining it. But it's not just wind anymore. I know that voice. Aaron, come back. The words cut through the stillness, slicing into me. I know it's not real. I've been hearing things for days. But the voice, my name, it feels like it's coming from inside my head, like it's pulling me into the storm, making me part of it. The snow falls harder now, blinding the windows, turning the world outside into an endless, swirling white void. Aaron, it's time. I can't breathe. The air is thick, suffocating. The storm is everywhere now, inside and out, and it's closing in. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when I thought I was in control. I thought I could outrun the past. But the choices I made, the people I hurt, they never really went away. They follow me just like the storm. I keep thinking back to that night, the night I left them all behind. That's when the storm started. It wasn't just weather, it was me. The guilt, the shame, the ache of knowing what I did. The storm isn't just outside, it's inside me, and it won't stop until I'm consumed. I hear the voice again, and it's louder now, cutting through the air like a blade. Aaron, you can't run forever. The storm is no longer just weather, it's alive. It knows me. It knows everything about me. The more I run, the closer it gets. The wind, the snow, they're just a reflection of something far darker. The storm is no longer just nature. It's the weight of my past. The whispers are louder now, pressing against my ears. The things I thought I left behind, the storm is bringing them all back. I try to leave the cabin, but the door won't open. The snow presses against the glass, suffocating me. Aaron, you can't escape. The voice isn't outside anymore. It's in the room with me. The storm has found its way in, and now I can't run. I try to run, my breath ragged, my feet numb in the snow. The storm is closing in. It's not the wind anymore, it's footsteps. The crunch of snow behind me. Aaron, you can't hide. I turn around, and there it is. The storm isn't just snow and wind. It's a shape, a dark, twisting shadow made of swirling snow and darkness chasing me. It's consuming everything in its path, and I can feel it, the weight of it pressing down on me. And then the storm speaks again. You can't outrun your past. I fall to the ground, too exhausted to move. The storm is on top of me now, swirling around me. I close my eyes, waiting for it to consume me. But then everything stops. The snow, the howling wind, the voice, it all goes silent. I open my eyes, the storm is gone, but I'm not in the snow anymore. I'm in my old house. The storm wasn't outside. It was never outside. It was inside me. I've never liked mirrors. They're too quiet, too still, like they're waiting for you to notice them, watching you even when you're not looking. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's because of that feeling I've always had, like something's about to happen. I don't know. But this mirror, this one was different. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a modern home. It was an old, tarnished thing, framed in dark wood, the kind you'd find in an antique shop or maybe at your grandmother's house. It had always been there, hanging in the guest bathroom above the sink, a fixture I never really paid much attention to. But that was before I moved into the apartment after my grandmother passed away. It wasn't just an object. It was a presence. A strange, unsettling presence that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. My name is Sophie. I'm not exactly someone who stands out in a crowd. I'm not the bravest person, never have been. But that's not the worst of it. Lately, I've felt watched. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's been getting worse. I moved into my grandmother's old apartment after she passed. It was left to me, a gift and a curse. The place held memories, good ones, of course, but there was always something else. A shadow, a presence, a feeling that I wasn't alone even when I was. But the mirror, that was what truly started it all. The apartment was small, drafty, the kind of place where the floorboards creaked under your weight and you could hear the neighbors even through the walls. But the bathroom, well, that was something else. Every time I entered, it felt like the temperature dropped, even on the hottest days. That coldness. It crept into my bones, gnawing at me. I'd turn on the shower to fill the room with steam, just to escape the chill that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. But the mirror, always the mirror. It fogged up in a way that didn't make sense. Slowly at first, just a mist. Then it built into a thick frost that covered the glass completely, leaving no reflection behind. It was eerie, unsettling, but I never thought much of it. Mirrors fogged up, right? It was normal. Until one day it didn't stop. It was a late afternoon when I walked into the bathroom, readying myself for work. The steam from the shower swirled in the air, and for a moment everything felt normal. But then something felt off. I paused, my eyes drifting to the mirror. It was clear, completely clear. No fog, no frost. I stared at it, wondering what was wrong. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure. My reflection, but not mine. It was me, but not. I saw myself standing in the bathroom, eyes wide in terror. My mouth open, as if I was screaming, but I wasn't making a sound. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, my reflection twisting in agony. But I wasn't screaming. I wasn't moving. The reflection wasn't me. It was a version of me, one I didn't recognize. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth twisted grotesquely. It flickered like a bad image on a screen. But then it didn't disappear. I turned around, expecting someone to be behind me, but there was nothing. Just the cold emptiness of the bathroom. For days, I tried to forget it. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was just overtired or stressed out. But every time I passed by the bathroom, I felt it. The pull, the unease, like the mirror was waiting for me to look again. And then it happened. Again. But this time, it wasn't just a reflection. I wasn't just seeing myself. I was seeing something worse. In the mirror, I watched in silent horror as my reflection screamed, the sound deafening in my ears, though I wasn't making a sound. The bathroom was darker now, and there, standing behind me, was a shadow. It had no face, no discernible features, just a dark shape twisting in the corner of the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I felt the air grow cold, my skin prickling as though the shadow were reaching toward me. I turned, panicked, but the bathroom was empty. Nothing was there. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection was still there, but the shadow was gone. The worst part wasn't just what I was seeing. It was how it felt. Every time I looked into that mirror, I didn't feel like I was watching a future unfold. I felt like I was living it. The images kept coming, growing more vivid with each passing day. Sometimes they'd repeat. Other times they'd change, but the fear always stayed the same. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't get away from what I was seeing in that mirror. I couldn't tell if it was a warning or if it was something darker, something that was pulling me in. And then came the worst vision yet. It wasn't just about me anymore. I began to see other people, friends, strangers. They'd stand in front of the mirror just like I had, and then screaming, always screaming. Shadows crept up behind them, dragging them into darkness. One night I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the glass when it happened again. But this time, it wasn't a reflection of me screaming. This time I saw my reflection turn, slowly. It reached out toward me, its fingers stretching toward the glass as if it were coming for me. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The reflection's hand touched the glass. Cold, so cold. It sent a shiver through me, deeper than any chill I'd felt before. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't control it. I was losing my grip. I tried to stop looking. I swore to myself I wouldn't let the mirror control me. I locked myself away, kept my distance, but the visions only grew more intense, more chaotic. The reflection wasn't just reflecting anymore. It started mimicking my movements. It twisted, contorted into something darker, something more grotesque. I couldn't tell if I was seeing the future or if I was being consumed by it. One night, the mirror shattered, but it wasn't just the glass that broke. It was me. I found myself standing there in front of the broken mirror, shards of glass scattered across the floor. My face streaked with tears, my hands trembling. And that's when I saw it. The reflection wasn't mine. It never had been. The field stretched before me, an endless expanse of frost-covered earth, the kind of white that almost hurts your eyes. The moonlight cast everything in a pale glow, untouched, pristine, and yet, wrong, it beckoned me closer, pulling at something deep inside me. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what lay beneath the frost. I'm Mia, a young archaeologist, rational, methodical, not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or spirits. My job is to uncover the secrets of history, not chase myths. But what I found in that frozen wilderness, it wasn't just history, it was alive and it had been waiting for us. The wind howled, cutting through me like a blade as we trudged deeper into the field. It wasn't a normal wind. No, this wind carried a low hum, almost like it was alive, like it was listening to us. The snow crunched underfoot, sharp and unforgiving, but it was so still, too still, like the world had been frozen in time. The others were talking, laughing, excited about the discovery we'd made. They didn't see it. They didn't hear it, the whispers just on the edge of my hearing. The frost was watching us, watching me. At first, it seemed harmless. A few strange symbols carved into the ice, markings that could have been anything ancient, mysterious, but nothing threatening. The kind of thing you'd chalk up to a lost civilization, a forgotten ritual. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be here. That this place had been left undisturbed for a reason. And then, it happened. The frost beneath my feet shifted. It wasn't the wind. No, the snow was moving on its own. Sliding, shifting, responding to something. Maybe to us. The others didn't notice, their laughter filling the air like it could drown out the creeping dread gnawing at my chest. It was then that I saw it. In the distance, a shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the way the trees bent under the wind. But no, it moved, slipped between the trees unnaturally. Too perfect. A figure that wasn't human, and then just like that, it was gone. I opened my mouth to warn the others, but my voice caught in my throat. They were already too deep into the field. The frost began to shift beneath their feet, warping, twisting. The whispers were louder now, curling around my mind. Only I could hear them. Only I knew what was happening. I tried to rationalize it. I was tired from the climb, the cold was messing with my mind. But then the ground cracked beneath us. The frost split open like a wound, and something stirred beneath. The others were too distracted to notice. But I could feel it, the pressure building, like the field was coming alive, like it was breathing, waiting. And then, the moon turned red. The ground opened wider. Figures began to rise, slowly at first, but with a terrible force, like something was clawing its way back into the world. These weren't ghosts, not like I thought. They were shadows, twisted figures of the past. Trapped souls from some long-forgotten ritual, released from their icy tomb. Panic hit. The others screamed. They tried to run, but the snow, the field, the very air itself, it wouldn't let them. I tried to push forward, my heart racing, but no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape. The spirits surrounded me, their pale faces twisted in anguish, their empty eyes locked onto mine. The wind screamed in my ears, the snow stinging my face. The whispers, it was them, calling my name. And as I looked down, the frost had already begun to crawl up my boots. I was sinking into it. I made it to the edge of the field. I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. But then I looked down. The frost, it had followed me. The spirits weren't gone. They were still here. They were inside me now. I felt their cold fingers curling around my heart, pulling me back toward the field. The ritual hadn't just been disturbed, it had claimed me. I wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. The field. It was never just a field. It was a doorway. And now there's no way out, not for me, not for any of us. The mountain looked beautiful that morning. Its slopes gleamed beneath the crisp, clear sky, untouched by the first rays of dawn. Snow hung heavy on the trees, sparkling in a soft, eerie glow. It should have been the perfect place to ski, the kind of fresh powder that every enthusiast dreams of. But as I stood there, staring out over the field of snow, a deep, gnawing sensation crawled up my spine. Something was wrong. Something I couldn't name. I'm Casey. I've spent my life on skis. I'm no stranger to the solitude of mountain trails, to the thrill of cutting through untouched snow. But even I couldn't ignore the strange things happening at this remote resort. The rumors had been circulating for weeks. Half-whispered conversations in the lodge, anxious glances exchanged when someone mentioned the slope. Skiers who vanished without a trace, their ski tracks left behind like breadcrumbs, leading nowhere. Authorities had come and gone, and not a single sign of those missing had ever been found. Just the tracks. Every morning, without fail, new tracks would appear, winding down the mountain as though the missing skiers were still out there. Somewhere. I should have stayed in the lodge. Should have trusted the fear that gnawed at my gut, telling me to stay out of it. But something in me couldn't let it go. Curiosity, and maybe a bit of pride. No one believed the rumors, not really. So I grabbed my gear, skied out to the base, and started my day, hoping to prove that nothing more sinister was happening here. The air was thick with cold, still in a way that made my breath catch in my chest. Up here at this altitude, you expect a certain bite to the air, but it felt unnatural, almost oppressive. Every breath felt heavier. I clicked my skis into place, the quiet only broken by the rhythmic crunch of my skis against the snow, a sound that felt too loud against the eerie silence of the mountain. The wind howled through the trees, but not in the usual way. No, this was different. It was as if the wind was whispering something to me, something just out of reach. My heart beat faster as the smell of pine mixed with something else. Something metallic, something sharp, blood, and then there they were, the tracks. Perfect, crisp ski marks cutting through the untouched snow, heading down the mountain. At first, I figured it was nothing. I'd seen trails left by skiers in the morning light before. But they weren't like any I'd seen. These tracks were deliberate, methodical, as if someone or something was intentionally guiding me further into the heart of the mountain. A strange feeling washed over me. It was like I wasn't alone. Every movement I made seemed watched, though when I glanced around, the trees remained still. It started innocently enough. I followed the tracks, but the deeper I went, the more I realized how wrong everything felt. The snow beneath my skis was smooth, too smooth. As if it had been sculpted, as if it were not quite natural. And the more I followed those tracks, the more the wind whispered through the trees, like it was urging me to stop, to turn back. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the need to know, the need to prove to myself I wasn't afraid. The further I went, the stranger it became. The air felt heavier now, and I began to hear something, Footsteps in the snow, faint at first, then louder, like someone was following me. But each time I stopped and looked behind me, the mountain was still. Silent. Empty. It wasn't until I reached a thicket of trees that I saw it. A shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the mountain, perhaps. But as I moved closer, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was something else. A figure. I couldn't make out its face, but I could see its form. Tall, unnaturally tall, standing still in the distance. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. My breath hitched in my chest, and before I could process what I was seeing, the figure vanished. Disappeared into the trees like smoke. I blinked and the mountain returned to its stillness, but the tracks, they kept going. Down the slope, deeper into the woods, into the unknown. I should have turned back then. I should have listened to that voice in the back of my mind that told me to stop. But I didn't. The curiosity was too strong. As I followed the tracks, the snow began to change again. This time it was softer, almost liquid in places. Like the ground was shifting beneath me. And the wind, it wasn't just whined anymore. It felt alive, like something was pushing against me, urging me forward. It was as though the mountain itself was trying to draw me deeper. The further I went, the less in control I felt. Every step was like walking through someone else's nightmare. The trees were denser now, the snow sharper. I heard things, whispers in the wind, soft echoes of footsteps just behind me. But each time I turned, there was nothing. No one, and then it happened. The tracks stopped, but they didn't end. They just stopped moving like they were waiting for me. The snow around me grew colder. A strange chill ran down my spine. It wasn't until I reached the edge of the mountain that I understood what I was facing. The tracks hadn't led to a skier, not at all. They had led to something else. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the movement of something dark, shifting beneath the snow. A mass, an unnatural lump that seemed to grow and rise. As it pulled itself from the snow, I saw it. This thing, this twisted creature, its arms like jagged branches frozen in place. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, watching me with hunger. I turned to run, but the snow, it wouldn't let me go. It pulled at my skis, pulling me deeper into the mountain's grip. I fought, struggling to break free, but it was no use. The tracks I had followed, my own tracks, began to loop back, pulling me into an endless cycle. I woke up back at the lodge. The walls felt colder, darker. The fire that had been crackling earlier was now a faint glow, barely keeping the chill at bay. The other skiers were gone. No one was left, and outside, fresh tracks in the snow, leading right up to the lodge. The mountain wasn't just trapping me, it was feeding. I've never been one for superstition or myths. I'm Kelly, the practical one in my group, always the skeptic. When my friends invited me to the ice festival, I thought it'd be a nice, quiet way to spend the evening. The sculptures were beautiful, intricate, lifelike creations of animals, knights, and angels. The craftsmanship was incredible, each piece seemingly frozen in time. We spent the whole day marveling at them, snapping pictures and chatting excitedly about which ones were our favorites. But as night fell, something shifted. The crowd thinned out, and before long it was just us. We were the last ones lingering at the festival grounds. That's when it happened, the first movement. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a small shift in the angle of a knight's head, a glimmer of ice in the wrong place. But then, another movement, a deliberate step. The tail of the wolf sculpture twitched. The detail in that piece had been astounding, the fur, the snarling expression, the poised stance. But now it was alive, And it wasn't just the wolf. The sculptures weren't just ice. They were ancient vessels, cursed to awaken once a year. Trapped in their frozen forms for centuries, they were given one night to move, to stretch their limbs, to be free. But this year, this time, they were hunting for something more than just their fleeting moment of freedom. They were hunting for us. I didn't believe in curses or anything supernatural for that matter. I'd always scoffed at those things, dismissed them as fanciful tales. But tonight was different. When I first saw the wolf's eyes shift, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was the cold, messing with my senses. But then it happened again. The eyes shifted, and I saw the fangs gleaming unnaturally under the moonlight. My friends hadn't noticed. They were too busy taking selfies, posting on social media, chatting about how amazing the sculptures looked in the dimming light. But something inside me, something primal, told me to watch. And then I felt it. The wolf's gaze on me, like it was aware of me, like it was waiting. The wind picked up as the last rays of sunlight vanished. The square was eerily quiet now, the only sound the faint crackle of ice and the occasional drip of water from the melting sculptures. The once vibrant festival had become a desolate, frozen wasteland. The sculptures cast long, sharp shadows in the streetlights, their jagged edges somehow making the place feel wrong. The air grew colder, heavy with an unnatural stillness. I could hear the ice creaking, cracking beneath the weight of the night. Each sound seemed to echo in my bones, resonating in the thickening silence. The sculptures that had been so lifelike during the day now felt ominously still, but something wasn't right. Then came the first whisper, a faint, barely audible voice coming from the direction of the ice. At first, we tried to laugh it off, blaming the cold on our growing unease. Maybe it was the late hour or just our overactive imaginations. But the whispers grew louder. And then the ice, those still, lifeless sculptures, shifted again. The wolf's head turned toward me. The knight's arm twitched. A crack sounded from the base of one of the statues. They weren't just sculptures anymore. They were moving, watching, hunting. I grabbed my friends. "We need to leave." "Now," I said, my voice strained with panic. They brushed it off. "Relax, Kelly, it's just the cold getting to you." But I couldn't ignore the growing fear in my gut, the way the ice seemed to pulse with life. I wasn't running from the sculptures anymore. I was running from something much worse, and I couldn't explain it. As we tried to make our way out of the square, the movements grew more deliberate. The sounds, creaking, shifting, became louder, closer. The wolf's tail twitched again, and I froze. "They're alive! They're hunting us!" I screamed, my voice breaking. But they didn't listen, too captivated by the moving statues to understand the danger. Suddenly, the knight's sword moved, swinging down with a sharp, unnatural motion. Its frozen limbs creaked and groaned as if it were waking from a long slumber, and it began to move toward us. I grabbed my friends. "Run!" I yelled, but it was already too late. The wolf was bounding toward us, its eyes burning with an unnatural glow. The knight wasn't far behind, its sword raised, prepared to strike. The sculptures, those beautiful, intricate pieces of art, were no longer static. They were predators. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. The ice wasn't just ice. These sculptures weren't just art, they were cursed. Ancient beings trapped in frozen forms allowed one night to be free. They weren't just moving, they were hunting. And we were their prey. I could hear their footsteps now, the scraping of ice against concrete, the slow, deliberate approach of something monstrous. My heart pounded in my chest, and no matter how fast I ran, they were always just behind me. The cold clung to my skin, biting into me, numbing me to the bone. The whispers came again, louder this time, full, clear words. "You can't escape." It wasn't just the sculptures anymore. It was the cold. The very air around us had turned into a trap, freezing everything it touched. The night's face twisted in mockery, its movements jerky, inhuman. The wolf growled, its breath like steam in the freezing air. I realized the worst part. They weren't just going to kill us. They were going to freeze us, turn us into statues like the ones we had admired just hours ago. And once we were frozen, we'd become part of the cursed collection, trapped for eternity. We reached the center of the square, but it was too late. The once joyous gathering had turned into a nightmare. The streets were filled with the sculptures, more of them, each one moving slowly toward us, inching closer. "They're going to freeze us. Please, you have to listen," I cried, my voice hoarse. But before I could finish, the world grew even colder, a biting chill that took my breath away. The wolf's fangs were inches from my throat. The night's sword raised high. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the worst. I had no way of outrunning them now. Then a sharp crack broke the silence. I opened my eyes, heart hammering in my chest. The sculptures were gone. The square was eerily empty except for the frozen statues scattered across the streets, lifeless, unmoving. My friends, they were gone too. I was alone, surrounded by ice, but I could still hear them. The whispering. In the distance, I could feel their eyes on me. They were waiting for the next night. I never thought frostbite could be beautiful, until it was. It started on my left hand, just a light tingling in the cold. I figured it was nothing, just the usual feeling you get when you're out here too long. But then I looked down and I saw it. My skin was turning an unnatural shade of pale blue, shimmering almost like ice. The glow beneath it wasn't cold, though. It was warm, feverishly warm. It pulsed under the surface like something alive, pressing against my skin, eager to get out. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, some optical illusion caused by the fading sunset. Maybe my mind was playing games in the isolation. But when I touched it, the chill wasn't just on the surface anymore. I could feel it. Something was moving beneath my skin, shifting in patterns I didn't recognize. And then came the pain. Not sharp or sudden, but slow, searing. A deep, burning ache that made it feel like I was becoming part of the frost itself. I'm Emily. And if you asked me 2 days ago, I would have told you I was prepared for anything. I've been a mountain guide for years, working alone, miles away from civilization. I knew how to handle the cold, how to navigate the terrain, but nothing prepared me for this. When the frostbite first appeared, I dismissed it. It happens sometimes when you're out too long. I was used to the bitter cold, the numbing chill that creeps in when you least expect it. But this didn't stop. It spread, slowly, unnaturally. From my hand to my arm, and then to my chest. At first, it was just a weird pattern under the skin. But the deeper it spread, the more I started hearing things. The first whisper was soft, almost like the wind just out of reach. But the longer I ignored it, the clearer it became. A voice, saying the same thing over and over. "The ice, it knows you." The world outside is frozen. A vast, endless cold stretches in every direction. The wind howls through the cracks in the cabin's walls, rattling the windows, rattling me. But inside, it's worse. Inside, it's like the cold is seeping in from every crack, not just through the windows, but through the walls themselves. The frost is growing. It's creeping. There's something about it, something wrong. It's not just the temperature. It's as though the frost has a life of its own. The air is thick with it, and I can't shake the metallic smell like blood, but colder. much colder. The patterns under my skin glow faintly in the dim light. I can't tell if I'm hallucinating from the fever or if the frost is actually alive. Every time I touch it, the heat beneath the ice flares up, burning like fire. I can't leave the cabin. Every time I think about stepping outside, the frost on my skin flares up, searing through my veins like liquid fire. The whispers get louder. "It's too late now." I scratch at it, hoping to break free from this thing that's taking over, but the ice, it changes. The patterns grow more intricate, as if they're learning from me, adapting. And then I realize I'm not the only one. Sam had it first, a little spot on his wrist. Then Sarah, just behind her ear. We tried to ignore it. We told ourselves it was just a bad freeze. But soon the whispers started for them too, and they weren't whispers anymore. "We are becoming one." The worst part? I don't know what it means. The frostbite wasn't just a disease, it was something else. A force, something that shouldn't be. As the frost crept up my legs, I looked into the window and saw my reflection. The patterns on my skin pulsed in time with my heartbeat, and I could swear they were watching me. Every night the whispers grew louder. The frost deepened. The patterns became more intricate, and the air, it felt different. The cold wasn't just cold, it was alive. Each breath I took seemed to freeze me a little more. I tried to leave again. I couldn't. The frost flared up, choking me, forcing me back into the cabin. And then, one night, as I stared at my reflection in the mirror, I saw it. The mark. It was on my face now, right under my skin. A glowing, intricate design that wasn't just beneath the surface, it was growing from it. It had taken over. The pain is unbearable, not just physical. The frost is inside me now in my thoughts. It's manipulating me. The whispers are no longer whispers. They're commands, thoughts that don't feel like mine. I see things in the reflection of the frost. Faces, symbols, eyes that don't belong to me. I can't tell if it's my own mind breaking or if the frost is changing me, forcing me to see things. Sam and Sarah, they're changing too. Their symbols are different, more twisted, and they're no longer just talking to me, they're talking to each other. I can hear their voices in my head, but it's like they're becoming part of it too, and I'm not far behind. I tried to fight it. I really did. But it was too late. The frost was taking me piece by piece, and as I looked at Sam and Sarah, I realized I wasn't the first. This had happened before. The frost wasn't just an infection, it was a summoning. It was calling something from deep beneath the earth. Something ancient. The cabin shakes. The floor groans beneath us, but it's not the storm outside. It's the frost. It's everywhere now, on every surface, every corner of the room. The symbols on our skin are glowing, sending out waves of energy. And the voices, they're not whispers anymore. They're screaming. They're desperate. Hungry. The frost is freezing the air itself. My body is breaking down, changing. The pain is indescribable, but it's not just physical. It's as if the frost isn't just taking me. It's taking everything. I don't know how long it's been since I last wrote. Time doesn't exist in the cold, but I can hear it now. It's here, the frost. It speaks through us. The patterns on my skin have finished their work. The whispers are no longer whispers. They're commands. And now I am not just part of the frost. I am the frost. I never should have made that snow angel. I was bored, alone in the quiet woods, the snow falling steadily around me. It had been coming down for hours now, and the world felt completely still. The kind of silence only a heavy snowstorm can bring. It was beautiful in a way, serene, like the world was holding its breath. I'd been longing for some peace, a break from everything back home. But when I made that snow angel, something changed. It seemed like such an innocent thing. A snow angel. Something I'd done as a child. I'd even felt a little nostalgic as I pressed my body into the soft snow. But when I stood up and looked back at the shape I'd created, there was something wrong about it. The snow around the angel wasn't just disturbed. It was moving. It swirled in an unnatural way, like there was something underneath the surface pushing back, as if the snow itself was resisting me. I froze. It felt like the ground had shifted under my feet, like the very world had shifted in response to something I couldn't see. The weight in the air grew heavier, and the silence that had once been calming now felt wrong. I'm Sarah. I used to love winter. As a child, the snow was everything to me. The crisp air, the stillness, the way the world seemed to quiet down and make room for something peaceful. But that was before the weight of life caught up with me. The past year had been rough. A breakup, family drama, the loneliness of city life creeping into everything. I came up here to this remote cabin to get away from it all, just a few days alone to clear my head. I thought it would help me reset. But now, after making that snow angel, my mind feels anything but clear. What I saw when I stood up wasn't just strange. It was wrong. The wind picked up, sending snow swirling around me, but it wasn't just the cold. It was the way the world had gone still. The trees groaned under the weight of the snow, their branches stretching low like they were trying to touch the ground. The kind of eerie quiet you only find deep in the woods. I turned back to the spot where I'd made the angel. My boots crunched against the fresh layer of snow, but the world felt suspended, like everything was waiting. When I looked down, my breath caught in my throat. The angel hadn't stayed still. The edges of the wings were moving. The snow around it wasn't just disturbed, it was shifting, alive. I took a step back, unease crawling under my skin. This was wrong. The world felt too quiet now, too empty. I told myself I was just overreacting. Maybe I was imagining things. I had been alone out here too long. The isolation must have been getting to me. But as I took another step toward the cabin, something caught my eye. A second snow angel. It was small, but it was there, right next to the first one. It was identical in every way. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. How was that possible? I hadn't made that second angel. I backed away slowly, my breath coming faster now. I needed to get inside. I needed to escape this thing. I turned toward the cabin, my instincts screaming at me to run. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was faint, like the wind rustling through the trees, but it grew louder with each passing second. Sarah! My blood ran cold. My name, but it wasn't my voice. It was hollow, distant. I froze in place, every hair on my body standing on end. I couldn't see anyone. No footprints, no shadows moving in the snow, but I felt it. Something was watching me. The whisper came again, louder now. Sarah, come back. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. This wasn't just my imagination playing tricks. The fear I felt now wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was something deeper. It felt like the snow itself was pulling me in, dragging me back to where I had made that angel. I turned and ran, my legs heavy in the deep snow, but the whisper followed me relentless. Come back to me, Sarah. I looked over my shoulder and my heart stopped. The second angel, it was moving. The snow around it rippled like the wind, but it wasn't the wind. The angel's arms and legs moved in fluid motions, like it was mimicking me, responding to my every movement. It was like a puppet on invisible strings, gliding toward me with slow, deliberate steps. The angel stood up, the snow cracking under its weight. Its wings flared, spreading out like it was trying to take flight, but the eyes were wrong. They were empty, hollow, no pupils, just a void. It tilted its head to the side and I froze. It wasn't mimicking me. It was waiting for me to make the next move. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The thing in the snow moved toward me, gliding closer, its movements jerky like something unnatural. It wasn't me, but it wanted to be. I reached the cabin, breathless, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it. I leaned against the cold wood, gasping for air, trying to steady myself. And then I saw it. 2 snow angels, standing just outside the window, watching me. I could feel it now, that same voice echoing through the walls, my own voice. A whisper, soft and cold like a creeping shadow. I've made my snow angel, but I haven't left it behind. I don't know how long I've been locked inside. Hours, days, the whispering has stopped, but the angels are still out there, waiting, watching. But something's changed. They're not just standing anymore, they're waiting for me to make the next move. And I know deep down that I will. It wasn't supposed to be this way. We were only a couple of hours away from the cabin, a quick weekend getaway, a break from the noise and chaos of city life. Mark had convinced me we needed this, just a little escape to the mountains where we could relax, disconnect. But somewhere between the winding mountain roads and jagged cliffs, everything started to shift. At first, it seemed harmless. A little snow, a bit of wind. No big deal. We laughed at the idea of being stuck overnight. We joked about how we'd make the best of it, how we'd tell the story when we got back. But then the storm hit, and it didn't stop. It grew in intensity. The flakes started falling harder, faster, blanketing the road beneath us. Thick, heavy snow that felt wrong. It didn't belong in this world, cold that had no purpose, like it was determined to bury everything in its path. Mark's voice broke through the howling wind. "Just a few more miles, Kate. We'll make it, trust me." But the snow kept coming. There was no sign of it letting up. And now, sitting here in the freezing darkness, with the snow pressing in on us from every direction, I'm starting to wonder if it ever will. I'm Kate, and I've always been the practical one. Mark's the adventurer, the dreamer. I've always been the one to bring us back to reality when things go off course. We've been together for years, and somehow I've let him talk me into 1,000 things I wasn't sure about. But this trip, this wasn't supposed to be one of those things. When the storm first started, I thought it was just another inconvenience. A little hassle. We'd laugh about it tomorrow. But hours have passed, and the snow's still falling, heavier than before. The car's heater died long ago, and we've been huddling under a thin blanket trying to stay warm. It's been more than a day. I don't know how much time has passed. The storm outside is endless. The thing is, it's not just the cold I'm struggling with anymore. I'm starting to lose my grip on reality. The storm, it's not just snow. And the more I try to convince myself that everything's fine, the more I feel something shifting. I'm not sure if it's the storm or if it's something else. Maybe it's what I'm starting to see in the corners of my mind. Maybe it's something Mark isn't telling me. The car is silent now, suffocating in the cold. The air is thick with the smell of dust and damp, but the real chill comes from within. Every breath I take hangs in the air like fog. The snow is still falling outside, but it's as if the world has disappeared beneath a blanket of white. It feels like we're the only 2 left in the world. Mark hasn't said much since we stopped. He keeps checking his phone, but there's nothing. No signal, no connection. He looks distant, too calm, like he's pretending this is all part of the plan. But I know him better than that. I know his bravado. I stop looking out the window. Every time I do, the storm seems to get closer, the wind howling louder. The snow presses against the glass like it's trying to get in. It's not just the cold. It feels like the storm is alive, and then I hear it. A faint whisper, almost like the wind itself is speaking, but not quite. "Kate, Kate, you belong here with us." My heart drops. The hours are blurring together now. The storm is relentless. It's as if it has a life of its own. The snow doesn't fall the way it should. It swirls, moves in patterns, almost like it's deciding where to go. And every time I close my eyes, the storm is still there, surrounding us, pressing in from every side. I glance over at Mark. For a second, his face looks wrong, pale. His lips are trembling, his eyes wide and distant. "Mark," I whisper, but he doesn't answer. He just keeps staring out the window, his gaze locked on something I can't see. "Mark, talk to me." Still nothing. And then I hear it again. The voice, faint but louder this time. More distinct. "Kate, you belong here with us." I freeze, my blood running cold. "Kate, what did you hear?" Mark's voice suddenly snaps through the silence. His tone is low, almost threatening. I jump, my pulse racing. I turn to him, but he's still staring outside, his eyes unfocused. "Nothing," I lie, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought I heard something outside." The wind picks up again, screeching against the car like a living thing. The whispers seem to grow louder, but I'm not sure if they're in my head or if they're coming from the storm itself. "Kate!" The whisper again, this time right behind me. My heart skips a beat. Mark taps his fingers on the window. 1, 2, 3 taps. It's so cold now, colder than it's ever been, and the chill is seeping deep into my bones. The cold isn't normal, it's unnatural. It feels like it's coming from inside the car. I shiver involuntarily, staring at Mark. He's still tapping. His face is blank. His eyes are fixed on something out there, something I can't see. Something's wrong. It's not just the storm. There's something wrong with us. The car feels alive now. The air is thick and heavy, suffocating. Every breath I take is harder than the last. Mark doesn't even look at me anymore. He's lost in his own world, staring out into the void of the storm. He's whispering under his breath, the words too faint for me to understand. "Mark!" I reach for his hand, but he pulls away, jerking his arm as if it's on its own. "Don't touch me," he snaps, his voice cold. "You'll just make it worse." The whispers aren't just in my head anymore. They're real. The storm is speaking, and I can't tell where it's coming from. The storm is alive. It's not just wind and snow, it's something far worse. Something darker. It's aware of us. It wants us. And it feeds on fear, confusion, and isolation. The longer we stay here, the more it grows, twisting the world around us until nothing makes sense. Mark and I are trapped in its grip. The storm has locked us in. I've started to feel it, this strange pull, like it's calling me, drawing me closer to it. I don't know if it's just the madness setting in or if something is really out there. The storm's intent is clear. It wants us to succumb. It wants us to lose ourselves in the cold, in the isolation, in the fear. I can't take it anymore. I don't know how long it's been, days, hours. The snow is swirling faster now, the wind pounding against the car like an animal trying to break through. I look at Mark again. His face is twisted, his eyes wide, his mouth moving, but not toward me. He's talking to something else. "Mark, we need to leave. We have to get out of here." But he doesn't respond. He doesn't even acknowledge me. I scream, pounding on the door, but it won't open. The storm won't let us leave. We're trapped, frozen, and then I hear it, my name again. Kate, come to me. I turn. The snow outside is no longer snow, it's a vast, endless void. A black, swirling expanse stretching far beyond the car, the storm. It wasn't a trap. It was a door. And now I have to walk through it. It was supposed to be a simple winter evening. Just me, the cold, and the silent night. The snow had been falling thick and fast, coating the world in a soft, white blanket. I could hear nothing but the crunch of snow under my boots as I walked down the driveway, heading back to my new house. I'd seen the snowman earlier, just a few hours ago, standing proudly at the end of my driveway, its coal eyes staring up at the moon, almost like it was watching over the yard. It had been the first thing I'd built when I moved in, something to mark the beginning of my new life, a simple moment of joy after the mess of my past. But then, I stopped. The snowman had moved. No, that couldn't be right. The snow around it was undisturbed. No footprints. Yet the figure at the end of my driveway was now closer. It wasn't just a snowman. It wasn't even something innocent. At first, I thought it was just an old childhood memory, a silly thing I'd done to make myself feel at home in a place that was still unfamiliar. But the snowman wasn't a piece of frozen art. It was alive, waiting, feeding off the fear of anyone unlucky enough to get too close. The more time I spent in its presence, the more it became familiar. Almost friendly. But I knew better now. It wasn't friendly, it was learning me, watching me. And it wasn't content to just stand still. I'm Emma, I've never liked winter. As a kid, the snow felt like a heavy weight, the isolation of it pressing down on me. I remember being trapped inside for days, unable to go anywhere, surrounded by cold, the long stretches of dark nights feeling endless. I thought this year would be different. After the breakup, I decided to start fresh, a new house, a new beginning. I thought I could escape the heavy memories, the weight of everything that happened. But now I was starting to feel like I had trapped myself. Every step I took in this snow-covered world felt heavier, colder. The silence pressed in on me like it was hiding something, like it was waiting for something. And then there was the snowman. I should have never made it. I should have never gone outside that night. The night was too quiet. Even though the wind was howling, it felt off, like the wind itself wasn't moving in the usual way. It lingered in the air, swirling around as if it was circling something. The snow under my boots didn't just crunch, it crackled, like I was walking on glass. I turned to head toward the front door, expecting the familiar sight of the porch light. But instead, there was just endless white stretching beyond the reach of the light. The cold cut through my jacket, biting deep. But it wasn't the cold that made my pulse race. It was the snowman. It wasn't where I had left it. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. I had built that snowman tall, taller than me, and it had been standing proud at the end of the driveway. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. Its position had changed. It was slightly to the left, closer to the edge of the yard. I tried to brush it off. The wind, the snow, maybe it was just exhaustion, but the unease, the creeping dread wouldn't leave me. I started walking faster toward the door. And then, just as I reached for the handle, I heard it, a faint crunching noise. Footsteps. But there were no footprints in the snow. I spun around. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the snowman. It was still unmoving, but something about it was wrong. It was too quiet. The air was thick, almost too thick to breathe, like the world itself was holding its breath. I wanted to tell myself it was just the dark playing tricks on me. But when I looked harder, the snowman seemed closer. The shadows around it shifted, bending, distorting. The coal eyes, Those lifeless black pits glinted, reflecting something that wasn't just moonlight, something darker. It felt like it was watching me, like it was aware. And suddenly I knew I wasn't alone. The snowman became an obsession. Every night, I would walk out to check if it was still there, hoping that it was just my imagination, that the isolation and darkness had gotten to me. But every night it was there, watching. Its coal eyes seemed to follow my every movement, even when I wasn't looking. And the more I stayed, the more the snowman felt real. It wasn't a trick of the mind. It was something else. Something that had learned to mimic the one thing that should have been safe. Something that knew how to disguise itself, waiting for the perfect moment. The house I'd moved into, the new life I'd hoped would free me, it was all closing in on me. The snow, the darkness, the cold, it was all wrapping me up, forcing me into the snowman's world. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was drawing closer. I had to understand what it was, why it was here. Then it moved again. Not just a shift, no, this was something more. The snowman lurched forward, stepping closer with a slow, deliberate motion. The grin on its face twisted, distorting the shape of its coal mouth. Its eyes weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. I stumbled backward, the cold biting into my skin, but it didn't matter. It was already too close. The snowman wasn't just a snowman. It had been waiting for something. It had created the snow, shaping it into something I would recognize, something I would trust. It wasn't just mimicking what I expected. It had learned, and it was getting closer. I turned to run, but my feet were frozen in place. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I turned back to the snowman. It was right behind me, too close. The snow crunched beneath its weight, but there were no footprints. No sound of movement except the cold, silent scraping of its body against the snow. I ran as fast as I could, my breath ragged, but it didn't matter. It was gaining on me. My legs were cold, stiff, like I was moving through ice, but I kept running. I had to get to the house. But when I reached the front door, it wasn't where I thought it would be. The snowman had blocked the way. I looked up, breathing hard, and there it was. I could see it clearly now. I was inside the snowman's world. It stood in the doorway, grinning, its coal eyes glowing like two pieces of burning charcoal. And when I turned back toward the yard, I saw the other one, the snowman I'd built earlier, still standing in place, far in the distance. But the one in front of me was alive. It was only supposed to be a quick hike, a short escape from the chaos that had consumed my life. I had no idea that walking into that cursed part of the mountain would change everything. The cold gripped me instantly, biting at my skin with a ferocity I had never felt before, but I pushed through it. Frostbite was just a scare tactic, right? I laughed it off, even as the chills sank deep into my bones. Wrong. When I woke up the next morning, the pain was unbearable. My fingers were blackened, stiff, and numb as though they had been frozen solid. But that wasn't the worst part. I lay there, disoriented, shivering uncontrollably when I heard it. A voice, soft and sinister, whispered through the wind as though the very mountain itself had spoken. "You're next." Frostbite doesn't just destroy the body. It's a curse, a mark, an invitation from an ancient winter spirit that preys on the living. The frost does more than freeze flesh. It consumes the soul. The spirit feeds on the essence of its victims, growing stronger with every life it takes. The curse lingers, stalking its prey, feeding off their fear until it becomes an endless, cold nightmare that consumes both body and mind. I've always been reckless. Hiking in the dead of winter was nothing new to me. I'd done it countless times before. The risks didn't bother me, not until now. But it wasn't just the frostbite that terrified me, it was what followed. That voice. The cold pressing in on me from all sides, and the creeping sense that something was watching, waiting, something ancient, hungry. The eyes of the mountain, I'd joke. But now I wasn't laughing. I had always prided myself on my strength, on pushing through pain. But this time the pain felt different. It was growing, consuming me, and no matter how far I ran, it always followed. The mountain had once been my sanctuary, a peaceful escape from the noise of the world. But now it felt like a suffocating tomb. The air was thick with something dark, something ancient. The crisp scent of snow mixed with the putrid stench of decay, like the mountain itself had been rotting for centuries. With every step I took, the weight of the silence grew heavier. My fingers were frozen, but I could still feel the pulse of pain deep beneath the ice, as though something was pressing against me from the inside. At night, the wind would howl, its mournful cry carrying whispers through the trees, soft, distant voices that seemed to slip in and out of reality. "You're next," it would say, but I was always alone, always, except for the frostbite, and the voice, it never left me, never stopped. At first, I thought it was just the cold playing tricks on me. The pain in my fingers was so intense I couldn't think straight. The numbness had spread, creeping up my arms like tendrils of death, and I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that I was just imagining things. But then I heard it again, in the silence of the night, a whisper so close, it felt like it was in my bones. "You're next." I thought I was losing my mind. But as the days dragged on, the changes became undeniable. My skin grew pale, my breath grew shallow, the frostbite spreading faster than I could control it. Something was wrong. Something more than just the cold was happening. Something that didn't make sense. And the worst part, the voice wasn't in my head anymore. It was out there in the wind, always just behind me, whispering promises of darkness, of cold. The worst part was the uncertainty. I could never tell if I was hearing things or if the voice was real. Was I losing my grip on reality, or was something else hunting me? I couldn't say for sure. All I knew was that the frostbite wasn't just hurting me, it was changing me. It wasn't just on my skin, it was seeping into my soul, feeding the curse. Every night I sat by the fire, trying to warm myself, but the cold never left. No matter how much heat I pulled into my body, it stayed, and with it the voice, always the voice. "You're next." Was it real? Was I losing my mind? As the frostbite spread, the pain became unbearable. My fingers throbbed with intense, gnawing pain, then went numb. When the feeling returned, it was worse than before, sharp, cold, like the frost had burrowed deep into my bones, consuming me from the inside out. It wasn't just the physical torment. It felt like the frostbite was carving away parts of me, carving away pieces of my soul. The voice wasn't just calling. It was coaxing me deeper into its grasp, drawing me toward whatever ancient thing had cursed me. I began seeing things, shadows in the snow, figures at the edge of my vision. When I looked directly at them, they vanished. Were they real? Or was I losing my mind? It wasn't just the frostbite that was after me. It was something older, something tied to the very mountain, an ancient winter spirit that had lain dormant for centuries. The frostbite wasn't a simple injury, it was an invitation, a mark that made me pray. With every passing hour, the curse tightened its grip. The more I tried to escape, the more it pulled me into its cold embrace. My skin grew paler with every glance in the mirror, my breath coming in labored, ragged gasps. But the worst part was my eyes, lifeless, cold, empty, like the frost itself. I was becoming one of them. The final night was the worst. The frost had consumed my fingers entirely, blackened, nearly lifeless. The cold was unbearable. I could feel the spirit drawing closer, the air thick with its presence. It was there, just behind me, its icy breath brushing my neck. The frost was consuming me. I tried to scream, to fight, but the cold had stolen my voice. All I could do was lie there, frozen in place as the spirit's voice rose louder than ever. "You're next!" I knew what was coming, and by then it was too late to stop it. The frostbite consumed me completely. My body turned to ice, frozen in the cold embrace of the spirit. My soul, torn between this world and the next, was trapped. As I lay there, immobile and frozen, I heard its final whisper, "You're never truly gone." And I realized with a sinking heart that the spirit had never just been hunting me. It had been waiting for me to come for the moment I stepped into its grasp. And now I was part of it forever.